Hey everybody, Mike Verta. So it's May 25th, and on this day in 1977, the original Star Wars debuted. I was actually 5 years old at the time. It was the first movie I ever saw. It was the first time I'd ever been in a movie theater. Just like for thousands of people, it had a profound impact on my life. It's why I became a composer. It's why I became a creative professional. But that original version of Star Wars has not been seen since 1997. That one that started it all, the one that built the Lucasfilm empire and the Skywalker sound, and eventually, I mean, it's so influential. We're still making Star Wars movies kind of today. But nobody's seen it since 1997 when the special editions came out. And when that happened, several shots were actually just cut from the Star Wars or replaced or changed. It was a really, really profound set of changes. And what a lot of people don't know is that when Star Wars was originally shot, the film it was shot on, the actual film that went through the camera, didn't last. Nobody knew that at the time, but the actual original camera negative ended up eroding and fading, and in some cases just became totally unusable, and in other cases shots are gone forever and will never ever come back. And because some of us who had interest in that sort of thing knew that, more than 20 years ago I started a process of doing a private restoration of that original version of Star Wars. And if you are a fan of that original version, you are definitely going to want to stick around and see it, because I'm going to show you some restored shots that, for all sorts of reasons we'll talk about, are literally at a higher quality than you've ever seen before, than I ever saw before, than you could ever see in a theater, in fact. So we'll talk about how that's possible. And, you know, for those real hardcore fans of us, you know, it's kind of the more official Star Wars day, although I think there's some sort of other holiday going on today. In any case, let's jump in. First of all, in 2018, I gave a presentation on film restoration techniques, and I gave it on behalf of films that are in the same position that Star Wars in, where the original camera negative may no longer be viable. It may be gone or destroyed or faded. And I had come up with some techniques, and I'd used it as a test case for these techniques was Star Wars, and it was about restoring Star Wars to a quality approaching, or in some odd cases better than, the original negative from existing film prints. And I gave that talk to a number of executives from, I mean, there were people from Fox and Disney there, and there were people from the visual effects studios and film restoration studios, and, you know, it was a kind of a technical talk. But it went very, very well. But I want to start just by playing for you when we were proposing to do this talk, I just put together a short little example, some before and afters, and sort of a broad overview of the idea. So I'm going to just play that for you real quick, just because it'll save some time and you'll understand kind of what we're doing. And then we'll go into the shots. We'll look at some of the shots and talk about the techniques and how it actually happened. Now, these videos that I'm showing you today have been lurking quietly on my Vimeo channel for years and years and years and years. And so if you're one of the many thousands of people who follow the project, you'll get some new information. Otherwise, this is just the first time it's ever been on YouTube, the first time we've ever sort of gone wide with it, as it were. So, but I still hope that there's things that you will enjoy. In the meantime, let's look at this original proposal video, and then we'll talk about that. By combining the data from multiple film sources, dirt and scratches and other artifacts, ever been seen before. And again, these are just coming from print sources. We're looking at the Lowry restoration here from the original camera negative, and you'll see this area of the trim is in fact lacking a lot of detail that was present on film. So here we are looking at the restoration from print sources. So it's actually revealing more detail than we're seeing in negative-based restorations. A really profound example of it here, a frame from the title crawl. By looking at the data from multiple frames, I mean, there's so much more legibility and detail in this one frame. In fact, this is actually more detailed than is present in any one single frame of the negative. Shots like this, which aren't as severely degraded, nonetheless benefit from stability and contrast. This shot has never been seen in this quality, not on any print individually or home release, certainly. And while all of these shots are being restored purely from film print sources, there's nothing stopping us from adding the contributions of whatever left of a negative, damaged or not. The more detail that we can put into the process, the more we can recover. Even the 20th Century Fox logo from the film elements benefited from this process, and afterwards we did a more traditional restoration on it, getting rid of the hair and whatnot. So it's exciting, it's fun, and effective. This concludes our proposal. Thanks for your time. So I understand the audio cut out there. Don't worry, we'll play it again at the end. So let me talk about technically, because I'm going to take you through this presentation a little bit and talk about exactly what we're looking at and kind of what went down with the restoration. As I said, the original negative is usually our best source. In fact, let's just look at a sort of an example here. The original camera negative for any film, that's the one that goes through the camera and the one that ultimately gets edited. And that original camera negative is always going to be the highest quality source for the photography. Now, in film, it actually tends to go through kind of a process where your original camera negative will then go into what's called an inner positive. And that inner positive, you see little red dots here on the inner positive, and we'll say that those red dots represent generation loss. One copying down. Maybe you get some more grain from that stock. Maybe you lose a little bit of detail. Maybe it's not quite exactly. It's real close, real close. But then generally that will then go to another negative called an inner negative, and at this point, now you have another generation of stuff that you've lost. That's the blue dots. So you're a couple of generations from the original negative. And then those will be used to make film prints. And the film prints are going to have all of the stuff from the first inner positive and the first inner negative. They're going to have all those holes in them. And then each print that is actually made that runs in a theater is going to have its own stuff, its own adding of grain and losing of detail, and that's the yellow dots. So we've got the red dots, which have carried along the whole process, the blue dots, which got introduced, and then the individual yellow dots, which are on each one of the prints. And these prints would be like the ones that we would have seen in the theater. And those will be different qualities, and the more they run, the more they get broken up and whatever. So like that. But we can think about all of those dots, instead of just as color dots, we can think of them as holes where the original information is missing or is degraded, things that stop it from being a complete picture. Now, normally in film restoration, and I think this is worth just stopping and talking about the difference between, like traditional restoration and what we can do today. Look, you can do anything today. You could repaint everything. You could color everything differently. You could remake stuff in CG. I mean, if you wanted to, you could remake every aspect of the film. But that's not really a restoration, not in the purest sense anyway. A restoration would be about, no, we want to pull out what's in there. We don't want to make new stuff. We don't want to paint eyebrows on the Mona Lisa. Yeah, it'd be more right, but it's not what it was. And we sort of use the original negative, the idealized original negative as okay, well, that's what Star Wars really looked like. So in this case, when you normally restore a film, if you have a negative, and your negative is your best quality, if you have a piece of dirt that's on the negative, a little scratch or a negative, you have a couple of choices. One, you can paint it out. You can paint it out using maybe stuff that's near it, like you just clone over here and you paint it over here and probably nobody noticed, go by real fast. Or you could actually take that little section of the frame and maybe borrow it from one frame that's on either side, or two frames where it didn't have the piece of dirt on it, and then maybe you wouldn't notice. And that's kind of how most film restoration is done. It's actually a destructive process. When you paint out the dirt or the dust or the scratches, you're painting on those original frames. The better algorithms, the better artists, you sort of don't notice it, but it occurred to me that there was another way to do it. And that would be, let's go back to the video, and that would be that if you could take just prints, which we know these prints are multiple generations down the line, but if you could actually stack them on top of each other like this, then they could sort of fill in each other's holes. So where one might have had a hole from the print, that piece of information probably exists on another print. And then all you'd be left with, these remaining holes, are the ones that got carried all the way from the original inner positives and negatives. But those inner positives and negatives also have generations. There's different ones of them that are remade from time to time. So if you could get a few more generations of original inner positives and negatives, you might ostensibly be able to fill in all of the holes, or certainly a lot more of the holes, and get back to what the original negative would be. Now, that's sort of an idealized idea, but that was the idea. And there's a lot of obstacles between here and there. There's a lot of technical things that make that very difficult. But it turns out it actually totally works. And so what we're going to see is you're going to see exactly how profound that is. It became the basis for the entire restoration. Now, like anything else, it's garbage in, garbage out. The better the quality of your print source is, the better the output will be. But there's actually a ton of stuff between here and there that makes it very, very difficult to do this, which is why it cost me so much money and much time developing tools, having them written, trying to figure out what could be done algorithmically and what had to be done manually. But let's move on and look at some of the rest of the process. And I think I have just another example first of, this is a shot. Now, what they did in Star Wars, in the special edition, they took out all the shots, the visual effects shots. These are primarily what we're looking at. They took out all of the visual effects shots that just generally look like shit. This is one of the shots. You're looking at it here. This looks to me like probably the laser disc that we all used to watch at home, which is not night and day from how it looked in the theater. But there you go. You got that shot. It's crappy. In 2004, on a DVD, on the bonus, features on the DVD, there was a quote-unquote original version of Star Wars, which was conspicuously shitty looking. But that was the last time this shot was ever seen officially, was in 2004 as part of the bonus disc shit on the DVD. And it is not fantastic, obviously. So here's the restoration. I'll let this run. You can see these. Okay, now here's the restoration of that shot. That's what the shot actually looks like. Now, an important thing for me to say is that the shot never looked that good when we saw it in theaters. Because no one print, we see here we're going through the different generations, and here comes the restoration here. So no one print that we saw in theaters ever had that much information in it, even a great print. So when we see this restoration, we are actually seeing, and by the way, this restoration is 4K. You could go out to print right now and run it in theaters and see the original Star Wars better than anybody ever saw it in a theater. You could do that today. But you're seeing this is what we got used to seeing. So there's just a profound level of detail that has been recovered from multiple sources, using those sources stacked on top of each other to reveal stuff. Here's another example. This looks to me like probably that was a Laserdisc. This is the DVD in 2004, and there's the restoration. Again, you look at these shots. I mean, you're seeing way more clarity in the shots, and you're seeing, but any one of these shots could be completely redone. But that's not the point. We want to see Star Wars the way it really was. So again, this shot, totally cut from Star Wars because of its quality, didn't actually need to be. Let's look at another. Let's start to get into the process here. Here's another one. Just as these are always fun. That's 1, 2, and here comes the restoration. That's the restoration. So you have what it would be our original DVD, or Laserdisc rather, that we were watching. We were like, oh yeah, Star Wars. And then later we got to, that's the 2004 bonus edition of, bonus disc Star Wars. But here in the restoration, there's that shot. Way more clarity, way more definition, way more stuff. And again, I really can't stress this enough. The shots could be redone. They could be pulled apart. They could all be fixed or whatever. I mean, you could make this look a lot better, but that's not the goal. We want the original Star Wars, that Star Wars that was good enough to change the way we make films, the way we market films, the way we make toys, all the technologies that changed. I mean, even people don't know what Star Wars is, never saw it. Every film they ever saw since then was affected by this. So many technologies. So we want to preserve that film, that just for history's sake, if nothing else. So all of the stuff that we're seeing in this shot was in there. It was never on one print that we ever saw, but it was in there. Somebody's correcting me and saying, I think you mean the 2006 bonus. You might be right. I might be 2004. The years run together. I'm old. So if I'm wrong about that, that's fine. All right, so let's talk about the process. Now, when you're talking about film, film is an organic medium. There's actual film that goes through the camera. And now the different film stocks have different qualities, different size of grain. They capture colors differently. Even the original camera negative captures the images in a particular way that might not be exactly how it is when you're looking at it. That's why they used to have to do color tests. And most film was Kodak, including the negatives that degraded into nothing. And a lot of the film prints that you and I saw, or if you ever had the opportunity to see it, were Kodak prints. And over the years, Kodak prints fade. They usually fade into red. The whole image turns red, and then the whole thing just turns into vinegar. It's the film degrades. You pull out a print of Star Wars that's been sitting around for almost 50 years, it will not look the same as it did when they ran it in a theater. But it happened to be that Technicolor had a process. It was a different process for developing film. I'm just going to simplify it a little bit. The result of which is that the colors don't really fade over time. The film holds up a lot better. It was a rare process. It wasn't done for very much. Star Wars happened to be one of the last films I think that they did this for, certainly in the UK. And so surviving out in private collections, not necessarily legally, but surviving in some private collections are some Technicolor prints, these called Technicolor IB prints. And they're in various stages of, their own kind of wear and tear with scratches on them and this and that. But they contain a lot more of the original color information and a lot more of the general detail information than Kodak prints. There are still some Kodak prints, and they have some advantages and disadvantages too. But just as an example, if we take a look at we're blown up real big here on a Technicolor print. This is one that went through, somebody watched this in a theater in 1977. That's one print. If we look at another one, that's another print. It's another Technicolor print. And here's a third one. I'll just let these cycle a little bit. So these are 3 different film prints which were shown to audiences in theaters. And these are largely unchanged from how they were in 1977. Well, you can see that the 3 prints have very different qualities. They just have different qualities. Now, these were scanned at 4K and were blown really up with 1:1. These are anamorphic prints. But if you just look at them go through, you're like, okay, so some have more fringing around the edges, some have better color, some seem to have more detail. So the essence of this idea was, God, if we could just get the best parts of every one of those prints, then we would really have something. Now, in order to do this, there's many, many technical challenges to do this. One of the first ones is that if you're going to stack film elements, literally stack them on top of each other. Just think of it like you were layering them like a cake. And you were going to try to do that, where if there was a piece of damage on this one, you'd steal it from the piece behind it, or from the third piece behind it, or the fourth, or the fifth. Much past about 4, the law of diminishing returns makes it not useful. But still, in order for that to work, those pieces of film have to be precisely aligned. They have to be absolutely dead nuts. Every last detail. Otherwise, you'll just end up blurring things and softening edges, and you won't get detail back. So at the time that I was developing this, there was no software tool that could do this. There may still not be. I mean, with today's adversarial networks and AI, there might be a way to teach them how to do that. But not only was there no tool that could do that, but every film, you know, was just a little, just like, because it's an organic optical process. Sometimes the frames would be just a hair thinner or taller, or like they might have a little warp in them. They just weren't exactly the same. So even if you lined up one feature, that didn't guarantee that all the other features were exactly in the same place. So it ended up being a process for me to register all of the elements of each frame by hand. But it also turns out that the human eye is insanely good at this. And I'll show you exactly what it looks like. Somebody said you basically got to match grain. Not even, because the grain isn't the same from print to print. It's not even the same from inner positive to inner positive or inner negative to inner negative. That's some of the advantage of it, because if you were just putting the same thing on top of each other, the most you could ever hope to do is get rid of the dirt and the scratches. But we don't want to do that. We want to fill in holes that don't exist on any one of the prints. That's the idea. So I'm just going to show you something that the human eye can do that you will do in a second, that an algorithm, at least to this point, was not able to do. And you'd have to go through the entire frame, every quadrant, every aspect of every frame, and make sure every element featured this process. But if I run this video, you'll see if we start with the pictures misaligned by even a few pixels, and then we'll bring them closer and closer together, and you'll see. So when we start here, let's see. It's not that one. No, it's okay. So watch how it sort of jitters. Watch how it jitters back and forth at the beginning, right? Now just watch it as your eyes suddenly settle and your brain will go, now they're aligned. Can you feel that? Even though they're very disparate sources, you can absolutely tell when they're not aligned and when they finally come into alignment. You see that? Just let's zoom out a little bit. So the registration process actually is sort of pass-fail. And this is exactly how I would have to do it. Once all of the elements were lined up, you can feel when it's right. So, I mean, I'm sort of oversimplifying how insanely unreasonably long this takes. But that sets the stage for everything. But as we can see here, so we're looking now at, we just took the color out of it for a second. So you're looking at one print. That's what the first frame is. That's one individual film print, and that's a Technicolor IB print. This is the best quality that any one of us could have ever seen in a movie theater in 1977. And when you combine the data from, in this case, 4 other prints, that's the new level of detail that we're talking about. So all of that detail, all of that clarity was actually in the film prints if you could combine all of those multiple sources. And that is just a profound level of detail, obviously. And so what you're seeing there is the contributions in this before. You're seeing the contributions of film grain, you're seeing generational loss. But again, if we were watching it in the theater, right off the boat, watching it in theater, that's the level of detail that we were looking at. But if we combine those, so this is almost it's like a different type of film that has a finer grain in it. Now, while here we're seeing the actual differences in, where we've taken the color out of it, but obviously the color benefits from this sort of resolution as well. It gets a lot more stable. There's a lot more information to get out of it. That's just, look at the little dots. You know what I mean? It's crazy. I have to tell you too, when I came across this process, like I was jumping up and down. I couldn't believe this actually worked. I couldn't believe this worked as well as it did. And when I gave this presentation, part of what I said to people is, this is not reasonable. This is not a reasonable process. You can't do this unless it's for a crown jewel in your film stable, because this is not a reasonable process it takes to be able to do this. It's just that the results are worth it, especially if it's a film like Star Wars where you're not getting the negative. It's gone. Somebody said, so this is a visual representation of an issue one faces when combining multiple analog audio tracks. There's bad phasing effects that happens due to warping, right? And I've never heard it done successfully in audio where there would be no warping, no phasing. But the analogy doesn't exactly translate, because here visually there was clearly a point at which the data could be combined, and it revealed detail way more than it would have ever obfuscated any detail. Somebody asked me how long I've been working on the restoration. Well, it didn't start out in 4K. It started out in 1977 just at standard definition quality. This is an ongoing project because there's always more information that comes and the tools get better. So it's been 20-some years. A version of it has existed for a while, but I always, here's another way you could do it. But again, unlike traditional, we are not seeing grain removal. We are not seeing denoising or degraining. That is not what we are seeing, because those processes are destructive. And when you know to look for them, you see them all over the place. You can tell when something's been degrained. And even the best degraining algorithms out there, and the best one on the planet, as far as I've ever seen, is Dark Energies by Cinefilm. Dark Energy Pro's software by Cinefilm is insanely great. But again, a destructive process. This was more about finding stuff that was actually in there. And that also means that a lot of things are taken care of just automatically, without getting too technical. If 3 prints have a clean pixel or a clean group of pixels, but 2 other prints have a piece of dirt there, an algorithm can be trained to go with the 3 that agree on nothing, because they outweigh the ones that don't. It's sort of a way of saying that. Somebody asked me, do I think that Lucasfilm was bullshitting when he said the negative was destroyed in making the special editions? No, he was not bullshitting, although it wasn't that it was destroyed. It still exists, although I've never seen it. But what is absolutely true is that original negative, long before then, had been such a problem that that ultimately caused them to retire the film stocks that Star Wars was shot on. So they knew it was happening. They knew it was happening that, they were, I think this was as early as Jedi, or not that long after, that they realized, wait, something's happening to the negatives. Something's wrong. So that's part of why this process came about. But enough of my yapping. Let's look at some more pictures, assuming VLC is still working. So here's just another shot. Let's see, assuming this, so here's a shot. Again, this is, that looks like our, yeah, so there you go. You got Laserdisc, and then that's the restoration. Laserdisc, then that is the Blu-ray or DVD, and that's the restoration. Now, I wanted to show this shot. It's a perfectly fine looking shot. Obviously, the difference between the DVD there, that's the last time we saw that shot in, I guess, 2006. And this restoration, is obviously higher. But what I want to illustrate about this shot is how this process is superior to traditional film restoration. Because One of the ways in which we can, as I said, one of the ways in which we can fix things is by borrowing things from frames on either side. It's like a temporal sampling. If you can't fix something right in the frame, you can maybe borrow that piece of detail from an adjacent frame. That's one of the ways they get rid of grain, and but it also always reveals itself as temporal smoothing. You can see it. But in a shot like this, where you've got the Falcon, every frame is very different from the one before it because it's moving heavily through the frame. So you can't directly, I mean, you sort of can, but not really directly recover the maximum amount of detail in this shot from another frame. It doesn't exist. A close version of it exists, but not a real one. But if you could take 5 great prints from multiple generations of this shot and find the data in them, you find that. You find all that extra detail. And it's not, you don't blur anything, you're not smoothing anything, you're not adding any artifacts, you're literally just borrowing from multiple neighbors. So all the grain that you see in this shot, now I just have to tell you, I mean, I don't know if this looks as profound as it is, but there's a shit ton more detail in this one frame. So it just becomes garbage in, garbage out. It just means that you know, the master frame that we now have has more detail in it, more detail in the color and more detail in the luminance. So you see that before and after. And again, that's not possible when you are simply using temporal sampling of adjacent frames. That exact detail in exactly the right place does not exist frame to frame. And it doesn't exist on any one film print. So again, the reason I say it is sort of a weird thing to acknowledge is that when we successfully restore one of these frames, we are now seeing Star Wars at a quality that literally we never saw, ever, never. Nobody saw it, never in a theater. I mean, maybe if they like watched the negative, you know, the inner positive back at Skywalker or ILM, maybe then that's when they saw it. But even then, so it truly represents a new Star Wars, a new way to see the film. And all Star Wars has ever had in the last like 40 years pretty much is just repackaging, right? It just gets a little bit better and a little bit better. But then starting in, I guess, 1997 with the special editions, that was it. And so we're sort of accustomed to, oh, they're just re-releasing Star Wars. Oh, they're re-releasing Star Wars. Not this. This is actually a Star Wars we've never seen. Somebody said, didn't Lucas incorporate his special edition changes into the original negatives? That's the rumor. I haven't seen the negative. But as we're going to continue looking at these shots, it is not a coincidence that all of the shots that were immediately cut from the special edition are all the roughest shots. It's just that what I've found in doing the restoration is that there was no reason to get rid of them. They had a whole life that was waiting for them if you wanted to take the time to do it. You don't have to repaint, don't have to recreate, just grab what's in there. So there. So how many different sources? Over the course, about 15 to 20 different sources in total that are chosen shot to shot, frame to frame, print to print, moment to moment. Between 15 and 20. It's somewhere in there. Can't remember. I mean, I have just terabytes and terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of scans. Have I ever thought about up-converting the frame rate in the same way you upsample? No, because the frame rate is 24 frames per second, and that's the frame rate. There's so many reasons that needs to be maintained. But again, we're not up-converting. These are not up-converted to 4K. These are film prints that were scanned natively at 4K. So there's no up-resing of the image. There's no degraining of the image. Nobody's painting out any scratches or dirt. Those are automatically taken care of because they don't exist on all prints. And if they do, then you can make the decision, okay, this went all the way back to the negative. That scratch is all the way back to the negative. Now you can make a choice if you still want to get rid of it. But in general, the whole idea of this is a restoration as non-destructive as possible. So that's part of the advantage of it. And it's also part of what makes it a giant royal pain in the ass and not practical. I mean, I'm not going to because immediately after I gave my presentation, people came up to me and asked me about monetizing the tools and making this a thing. And I'm like, I have not figured out any way to even remotely take out the operator from every frame, days, weeks. And so I couldn't begin to say that this process was commercializable. It would be an insanely expensive you know, way better product for crown jewel films. So let's look at some more stuff. Let's look at, so here's just because, you know, like who doesn't like pictures, right? So here's Alderaan, the blowing up of Alderaan. That's probably our Laserdisc. That would be your DVD. And here comes the restoration. So, I mean, obviously in this case, you know, the restoration is going to always look better. But what's important is to look at the ways, this shot, again, excised. This is not in Star Wars anymore. None of the shots we're looking at are in Star Wars. They've been gone since 1997. They were good enough for 20 years, but now they're gone. So this shot, this is the original shot. And if it looked like shit, yeah, I guess you'd take it out. But it doesn't have to look like shit. It can look like that. And that's not creating anything. That's not painting anything. That's not redoing anything. There's no CG in it. That is simply what was in the film, if we can go through a process of recovering it. Let's look at another one here. Oh, here's a fun one, the binary sun. So here's a shot that we're looking at on the Laserdisc. This is how it appeared on the Laserdisc, and this is another way of showing the process. Here was the shot. That's the one that was redone later. They changed the color and they stabilized it a little bit so that the two elements, the two suns, are smooth. If you look at the original, in the original, look at the way that the bottom right sun is bouncing around. But it is not bouncing around here in this stabilized and recolored shot. This is a perfectly fine thing to do in a film restoration, but it is not how it was in the original film. So in the restoration, sort of has the best of both worlds, or the worst of both worlds if you want to look at it. It preserves all of the actual stuff that was actually in the film in 1977, albeit with better color, fidelity, and a lot more detail than we've ever seen before. Now at that point, right, as we go through these three, if it was driving you crazy, I guess you could go ahead and, you know, redo that, or stabilize it like that one was done. But it's a garbage in, garbage out. We want to have the option of being able to preserve Star Wars as it was, and there it is. So, you know, if on screen that's just making you go crazy, all right, well. But at least then if we're doing traditional restoration stuff, we're doing the least amount of it possible. Let's look at just another example here. Here's I don't know why that's so. Here's the original Star Wars title card. I don't know why it's jerky like that. There's from the bonus disc, and here's the original version. And it's just got so much more fidelity in it. So I have no idea what's wrong with the frame rate there. But there's your DVD. Here's your original film out. This looks like it could have been created today. This element looks like it's new. Now, one thing is that when it comes to graphic elements like that, this process seems to do really, really, really well with that, as well or better as it does with, you know, normal photographed elements. But that just happens to be a fairly profound version of it. But I'll show you one that's even. Well, let's look at a couple other ones. Oh, here's one. This one always gets my nostalgia button going. Check this out. This is the original Lucasfilm. Now, you know, this is how it was on Star Wars. And it just was just this. There's your Laserdisc. That's how we used to watch it on our Laserdisc, our definitive edition Laserdiscs, which we used to, right? And then, all right, it's all bloomed out. Then you got there's your 2006, I guess it is, bonus edition, right? There it is. Here's the restoration of that from the original film prints. Again, obviously a lot cleaner, a lot more fidelity, but not redone. It's not a single frame that's been repeated or any of that stuff. It's got all of its original grain in it. It's just that it doesn't have all of the wear and degradation of multiple generations. There's no reason that graphic shouldn't look that good today. Here's another example, is the A Long Time Ago. There's your Laserdisc, there's your DVD, but really on the film, there it is. And they've redone this graphic a bunch, and it's not right. They've remade this graphic like and it's not the right color, and the fonts aren't the right. It's just not right. It's just not right. So that one's right. That's the actual one, and there's no reason in the world we wouldn't be seeing that. Let's look now at one of my absolute favorite shots from the restoration. Again, a shot that has been completely cut from Star Wars. This does not exist in Star Wars at all anymore. And here's the shot as we saw it on the laser discs. And then here's your 2006 bonus edition. That was the best I ever saw. This little shot looking. But here comes the restoration. This just blows me away. It's like, yikes! Look at that. I remember when these results first started coming out, I was just like, get out. How did it, just for whatever reason, this shot, especially the detail that's in the far ships. So a traditional film restoration process could not have gotten this level of detail. You just couldn't have gotten to it. But if you could, there's no reason to have shut that shot out completely. There's no reason. That looks perfectly good. There's no reason to have to replace that with crappy dated CG. There's no reason to do that. No disrespect to John Knoll, who did the very best he could with electric image at the time. But again, this process just allows for stuff that was unnecessarily excised. Now, this is true for other shots which were cut for no good reason. This shot was just cut, replaced with this really horrible thing in a beret. But this shot is gone from Star Wars, so we've restored that. Now that's the DVD. Here's the film restoration. So a restoration like this, it's usually one. That's the laser disc. Here's your DVD. A lot of smearing in it, and here's your restoration. Not as night and day as other things, but totally fine. You don't need to replace that shot. That's a perfectly good shot. Now let's talk about this. This is the one. Okay, I'm not even lying when I say this is the worst shot in Star Wars by a billion miles. When they replaced this one for the special edition, and it was so horrible, but I don't want to get into why. I was like, yeah, of course, because this shot never didn't look like complete ass. This is the laser disc. Here comes your 2006. Now, you can see all this like ghosting and stuff that's on here maybe. This is all right. I will tell you, on the very best film print that I have of this shot is horrific. I mean, there's just never a time in any theater ever that this shot didn't make everybody involved want to kill themselves. This is the worst. So it also, for me, I have a whole video on this. By the way, you can go to my Vimeo channel and see long videos on every one of these shots. Really long, rambly videos with crackly audio that makes you want to go to sleep or kill yourself. Videos on all of these. But using this process, I couldn't believe it, but look what we found in these plates. Look at that. Get out. Now, you could go ahead and you could do all kinds of stuff to that shot. You could do all kinds of stuff to it. But just a raw recruiting of data from film prints. I don't think this shot looked this good on the negative. I don't know. I don't know what happened with this shot. I mean, the original negative, yes, but by the time they'd gone through putting the Vaseline on the lens and all the other stuff, it had gone through so many generations. But yeah, if you're not seeing the real detail, although how can you miss that? Check them out on Vimeo, because you can see these things on full quality or whatever. But yeah, man, this again, another shot that surprised me as much or more than anybody was just to know if that shot had ever looked like that. If you know you're watching a film from 1977, you are definitely forgiving this shot. There's no reason to have completely excised that. And again, here's your 20th Century Fox logo. That's a restoration. Even a typical thing like this, obviously, you got to have the original Fox logo. It's part of what makes it feel like Star Wars. here the coloring if you wanted to after this restoration, after, you fix the colors or whatever. If you wanted, you could go back and regrade it so it's got all those colors in it. You could do that, but it's still going to be garbage in, garbage out. There are so many. This is a shot of R2's Arroyo. This is the restored shot of it. This is a restored shot of a sandcrawler. This is another shot that was restored without going. All of these shots were cut from the film or changed, and for no reason, because when they're cleaned up, they are totally, totally, totally fine. And so much of what has motivated me to do this restoration was that it was unnecessary, and that even in the rest of the film, that it could be presented in a way that Star Wars has simply never been seen by. I would go to the theater right now and watch this. I'd pay out the ass to see that in a theater again, and I think most people would. I don't know if out the ass, but certainly the idea that there is a true 4K restoration of the original Star Wars, the original one, the one that deserves to exist, for God's sake. Like, you could make a special edition. You want to nerd it out and put all kinds of stuff on it. You do that, but the original shouldn't be like literally shit canned. You know what I mean? Like, that's not. You know what I mean? Like, you have like here's the original, but it's never been seen. Not even anything close to this. So, as I talked about in my presentation, if you wanted to take what exists of the original camera negative and make it one of the contributing factors to this, you could take this thing a whole other level. So, in terms of detail primarily. If not, if color fidelity's been lost, then just in terms of luminance and detail, there's a whole other thing that this could go to. So there is a real version, another version, a 4K or 8K or whatever version of Star Wars that is just waiting to be discovered. None of the releases, including current ones, are anywhere near this quality. And considering it's obviously one of the most influential, if not the most influential film in history, it's always, always, always confused me that it's like essentially forgotten. Somebody asked me, and I'll show some other videos too. Somebody asked about what I thought. There are some other restorations of Star Wars that have been done. Somebody asked me what I thought of them. And I think the most famous one is done by a guy named Harmy, or he calls himself Harmy, Peter. And I actually have advised him a little bit on some of the colors and stuff when he was working on his restoration. None of the restorations, you can't really judge them. They just don't have the money or the resources technically or the time to do what I've done. It's not fair to compare them. They're fantastic, loving efforts. We have one very, very, very different thing between all of them, beyond quality or whatever, and that's mine has never been released publicly. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that because, one, I'd be sued into oblivion in a microsecond, and number two, Star Wars changed my life, and although I don't agree with the way that it was, that it's been changed and all that stuff, telling Lucas to go fuck himself that big is not my. It doesn't seem like good karma to me. That said, part of the reason I gave that presentation and have talked to people from Fox and Disney is in hopes of one day having it official and making it and doing a thing, because I think they could make I think it's a cash register, frankly, but hopefully that'll come to pass. You just have to let things play out. But like I said, I do this stuff professionally. I spent tens of thousands and tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars in research and in software tools, 20 years. It's not fair to hold other people. They just don't have that time or it's not fair. So in terms of the work that's been out there, and I know that some people took some shots of mine in various states, like some scans, and tried to do things with them. There's no offense to anybody, because I applaud the work. There's nothing like this. This is this, and then there's all others, and that's just how it is. And I don't even really feel like I'm taking credit for that, because the truth is it's in the film. It's really not me. I just figured out how to get it out of there. But no, there is nothing even remotely approaching this quality, and people haven't seen 99% of the film. So, but like I said, considering the amount of time and effort that's gone into other restorations, I can't take that away from them. And there's some really talented people who are super dedicated to it. And so I got nothing bad to say about them. I just also am not going to beat up guys in their bedroom who are trying their best or whatever, even if I'm just not going to do it. Let's see. Are there people who want to release the restorations? So at the time that I was giving this presentation, there were still a lot of negotiations going on between Fox and Disney, and the people that I was talking to weren't directly the people who could say yes or no to this kind of thing, but were obviously very interested in the process, and their sort of feeling was like, well, this is not the time because there's all kinds of stuff going on with the mergers and all that stuff. So I've learned to be patient, Luke, be patient. And I tend to believe that stuff takes care of itself in time. If this thing deserves to see the light of day, and if now the Disney Corporation wants to like re-tap the golden goose, give me a call, we'll work that out. And if not, well, at least I know Star Wars was a beautiful film, which is not one of the words that's usually used to describe it. And a lot of the live action shot too, when you see, there's stuff in there that we've just never seen, and it's truly remarkable. So, let's see what we got here. How did you determine the proper colors for color grading? Okay, so we'll look at some of the other videos. Over the course, when I got my first official Star Wars job was doing a new CG R2-D2 asset. You've probably seen it on the channel. I did it for one of the visual dictionaries. It was an exploded view. It had Billy Brooks's legs boosters on it. And actually the version that went into print was okay. It got way better after that. But that asset was used in it's been used in a lot of consumer product stuff, and it got used for other licensee stuff. And then I went on to do a lot of work for other Star Wars licensees, creating characters or ships or renderings or doing research on making replicas and all sorts of. My house is a museum of replicas, usually because I worked on them. And so in the process, I actually was very fortunate to get to meet a lot of the people who originally made the film. And then when I was restoring the matte paintings, we'll look at a couple of the matte paintings. When I was restoring the matte paintings, I got to talk to Harrison Ellenshaw, who painted them, and ask about the colors. In fact, let's bring up... Let's see if we can bring up some of that stuff. I probably have that somewhere. And so, over the course of looking at film prints that haven't faded and or talking to people who actually did the work, that's generally the process by which I would arrive at, what I would say, that's probably the color. Let me give you an example. Hopefully let's see if there's any, I don't think there's any audio here. Let me see.
Working on the restoration of another one of these.
Let me just turn that audio down. So this is an example. Let me do this here. Let's see. Let me just see if I've missed any other questions real quick. So you've done the whole movie, not just the clips that are online to do. I've actually done about 85% of the film. And actually the reason I didn't finish the film, because I totally could, is because especially at the time I was having any conversation with people who might be able to do something, I thought, you know what, I'm only ever going to want to do this one time because it's such a nightmare. And if there's any shot in the universe of getting the original negative into this data stream, let me just wait and see. And then if that really doesn't happen, it'll just wrap it up and it'll be what it is. But some part of me has just thought, it's just like, God, get that negative in here. Just whatever's left of it. And then we would all say, that's it. There's no more. That's the best Star Wars will ever look. That's it. That's it. That's it. It's what it is. And so I just thought, well, hang on. Hold on. Just wait. Yeah, my version was called the Legacy Edition, but it's yeah. What about the new UHD 2012 Reliance MediaWorks restored former Lowry? I've seen all of them. I've never seen any of them at this quality. And again, because this quality is uses more, there's more data. There's more stuff there. They're there's just a lot of them have a lot of work on them, and there's a lot of great, really talented people involved. When we looked at, there's a video we can look at the Lowry restoration, and there's a lot more detail that was actually in the prints than ended up at the end of that restoration. But that was earlier. They were blazing through it. The technology wasn't the same. These are all giants' shoulders we're standing on. did I ever do the big screening with Draco? I did. For his 5th birthday, we did rent out a theater and screen it for my 5-year-old boy, and not surprisingly, he immediately became a Star Wars fan. Have I completed my version? Nice job for the years you've been working. Oh, Dave, yeah, about 85. Yeah, 85%. Did you see the video where J.J. Abrams was talking about releasing the original trilogy on Blu-ray? I haven't seen that. It's been talked about, but to me the question is always like, okay, but what are we releasing? Because to this day, in the 20-some years that I've been working on it, I have never seen images at the quality that I know they can be at. But then again, I don't know anybody who's really putting in that kind of work, and I don't even know that it would be worth it money-wise. I mean, at least to the studios. You'd have to, I would have to just, there's no way. If the actual studios and I were talking about doing this, I would have to it would just be like, they would never, the actual, what this would cost, they would go, okay, then no. So I'd probably have to gift a year of my life to it. But if not for Star Wars, then for what, man, right? So I would use whatever's left of the interpositive or the color separation masters or the negative, just whatever we can. But I know for a fact that none of those would be able to create a restoration at the individually that it needs. You need to combine intelligently the data from as many good sources as possible. That's the essence of this process, and that's why it works, because it doesn't exist on any one source. Not any one remaining source. If the negative was still pristine, then there would be nothing to talk about. We just run the negative and scan it, your highest thing, and that's what it is. That's not the case. Let's see. Get those restored shots out in the world. Well, again, like I said, there's a philosophical point there. Star Wars really, really did change my life, and apart from just not wanting to get sued into oblivion, it's just not the right thing to do, man. It's just not the right thing to do. It's not the right thing to do, especially when it's not over yet. This Star Wars has been here 50 years. If it's the last thing I do, maybe on my deathbed, if it still hasn't come out officially, I'll fuck you, and I'll go. I don't know. We'll see. That's 50 years from now. All right. So let's look at this shot. So this is a shot from. This is one of the ones I worked with Harrison Ellenshaw on, and I don't even remember what source we're looking at here, but this is probably a film source looking at it, but it's one of the Falcon matte painting shots. Again, replaced. It was replaced and redone for the special edition on the idea that this original version of the shot was not acceptable. Now, a lot of people don't know that this is actually made up of several pieces. There's the live-action photography, which is the stormtroopers and the guys running around. Here's the restoration of, or no, that's not it. So there's the restoration, just so you can see a little before and after. That's the before, that's after. It's a perfectly fine shot. Get out of here. Now, let me see if I can find in this video. I'm pretty sure I talked about this. That it was actually made up of 3 pieces. And there was the plate photography of the stormtrooper guys running around. And then there was a little strip. So there's the cockpit, as I recall, the cockpit and the stormtrooper guys running around. That was all live plate. Then there's a little strip that runs along it, which is actually Harrison's painting, which blends between between the actual set on the there's what he painted. That's a blend between that and a model. So this top part there is actually a model. It's actually the Millennium Falcon model, and then he painted that way to join the two things together. So I talked to Harrison for a long time about the colors and the palettes and what this looked like as he was working with it, what his expectations were for it at the end of photography, and at the end of that process, he directed me toward that composite. So. If you want to talk about, well, I can see the paint strokes and whatever. Yeah, as may be, man, but that was 1977, and this shot is not so crappy it needed to be completely cut and redone. So there's one example for that. Let me find another one that Harrison and I worked on was the where is it? Mos Eisley. There you go. So. And as I recall, I think this is even feeling like a film source. It's just been a long time, but yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is a film print. So this is actually a print just one single print and a great quality print. This is how we would have seen it in the theaters. It's not bad, but again, using this process of recruiting from multiple prints, there's actually a ton more in there, detail in Mos Eisley and in color stuff. So so Harrison guided me through the coloring and the rest of the stuff. So just this painting, just perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Yeah, it doesn't have ships flying around in it. You're right. It's not 2020, but it's still a great shot. Let's see. Oh, here's one thing we didn't talk about. No, don't make that smaller. I don't want that to be smaller. No. Dude, I hate this program now. Today I'm mad at I'm mad at VLC. All day I'm mad at it. Let's make this bigger. This was another example of the restoration stuff that I sort of dug. If you look, you can see that the letter forms are all really, really eaten up. You can't read this anymore. You can't read that stuff. That's what it looks like if you blow it up. They're just eaten up by film grain, and they're eaten up. I mean, I've taken the color out of it here, but by the time the letters are way up here at the top, you can't read that anymore. That's generational loss. So using this technique and just recruiting things from other frames, look what we found in there. Look at that shit. You can read the top line now. Again, this doesn't exist in any individual film print, but it does exist cumulatively. So yeah, man, this is like one of my favorite things. Just like, get out, what? You know, I always feel like a kid with this stuff because I would see this and I would watch the results start to come in at the end of the stuff, and I'd just be like, that's crazy. That's crazy. And that would always make me want to keep working on it because it would be like Christmas. And then I'd be like, this needs to come out. I mean, something's got to keep you going all those years. Let's see if I have other ones here that haven't. This isn't what I think it is it? Oh yeah. Here's another shot that completely cut. This is actually, interestingly enough, this shot in the special editions is one of the ones I hated the least. But this is the original shot. This is the original one, and it's really rough. So this one is no longer in Star Wars. And again, just going through multiple print sources, got that out of it. Okay, that's not amazing, but you don't have to cut it. What? That's totally fine. That's great. And in fact, again, this is a film print. This is how we would have seen it, although, with a little better color. So this has more detail than we would have seen in a theater, but come on. That is totally fine. Totally fine. And so these just tend to be more profound examples of it, but come on now. Here's a guy that got cut out of the film for no good reason. Let's see. But bring him in here. This guy's not in the film anymore. This guy, remember this guy? He's not in the film anymore. He cut him out in 1997. He got replaced with this thing. I'm probably, it's now that we're a good hour and some into this, I'm going to tell you what the problem with the special editions is. But this typifies it. We didn't need this guy. We didn't need this guy. So here's our little guy, and here he is restored. Perfectly good. Not night and day, because it didn't need night and day. But mostly the point is it didn't need to be cut out of the film in the first place. So there's tons of shots. Again, you can go to my Vimeo channel and you can see in-depth discussions about all these and a lot more shots too. A lot more of them. But, there's just something to be said for preserving a piece of film, just the history of a piece of film this important. It's George Lucas' film. He can do anything he wants, or it was. They can do anything he wants with it. He can change it. He could overdub Chinese on the whole. It's his film. But one thing we learn as creatives You learn this, is that you have to let your work go and then take all your energy and put it onto new projects. That's what you have to do. Otherwise, I can go back and listen to pieces of music I wrote when I was 20, and I want to change every note of them because I'm 20. I'm almost 30 years older. I've learned a lot more, and I'm a different person than when I was 20. So of course, I could go back forever, and I could keep redoing pieces of music I wrote when I was 20. But that's not the point. The point is, no, write new music. Move forward. That process never ends. And if that piece of music that I'd written when I was 20 had the same impact as this film had on people, including me, then you'd say, no. Now it's not even mine anymore. I raised it and then I sent it into the world like a child, and it's done all kinds of things. You can't bring that child home and then re-raise them. It's a creative thing you're supposed to learn, is that you will always feel like your work, that you abandoned your work. You will always feel like it was stolen from you. You will always feel like with more time and more money, there's more that you could have done, and you're probably always right. But then the other thing that you learn is, okay, so take all of that regret or whatever it is and pay it forward, move on to new things, because otherwise you'll be stuck in that loop forever. So you can't go anywhere in the world somebody doesn't know what the Force is and why may it be with you, or who Darth Vader is. It's become part of the lexicon. And for 20 years, that film was perfectly fine. It was good enough to make 2 sequels and to change an industry and to become part of our story. I mean, it was fine. And then all of a sudden, after 20 years, it was unforgivable and things needed to be cut out of it and have never been seen since. It's just not right. And not necessary, especially when there's a whole new life of potential waiting inside of that original film. We could talk for another 3 hours on the specific changes and why they're destructive often to the narrative of the film and why they're destructive to the visuals of the film. A lot of times they don't match. They take you out of the style and the aesthetic. Sometimes they directly screw with the basic storytelling structure. I'll give you one example. That shot we looked at with Mos Eisley. Remember that one? Where they're looking out over the thing? I don't know. Everybody who knows this film at all, where's our Mos Eisley shot? Let's bring that up while we're talking about it. Everybody knows that in this shot, when they're looking at Mos Eisley, Ben tells Luke, it's the whole point of this shot, that where they're going is, you'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy, right? We're going into a dangerous place, an insanely dangerous place. And that's the whole point of this little moment, to get the audience set up that what's coming is scary and dangerous. And in the original film, they pull into Mos Eisley, and they are immediately confronted by stormtroopers questioning them. And then from there, it only gets worse as they go into the cantina. Well, in the special edition, the first thing that happens after the shot is an extended sequence of slapstick goofiness. Literally slapstick, it's all but fart noises. And from a narrative standpoint, you've now just undone everything that you did for the audience. This is a scary, scary time. And now, okay, so it's a lot of that. It's a lot of that in the special edition. It's almost like you've forgotten how to tell the story. Again, we could talk for about 50 hours. That's been debated forever. But those are part of the reason why that original version of the film should at least exist in some capacity. And how about in a capacity that's better than it's ever been seen before? That's my feeling, and that's why I've spent the better part of 20 years bringing it to fruition. Have I ever spoken to George Lucas about this? I have not. George Lucas, I mean, for a long time was very, very, very clear. There was destroy orders on any versions of the original Star Wars. That's why some collectors really made sure to hold on to it, because if it had ever gotten out, there was very clear orders. Hey, that original version is gone. It's dead. He said that many times. It doesn't exist. This is his version of the film. It's his right, and I believe he thinks that. But it's also the same guy who once made the very same argument that original trilogy fans make about preserving history. I think in his case it was preserving uncolorized versions of Three Stooges films or something. But he argued very passionately for why they're important parts, as they're important parts of film history. And then he went and sort of did the worst example of it possible. It's his film, God damn it. He can do anything he wants. It's just that film also changed a lot of people's lives and became part of the lexicon. And if for no other reason than to honor what it was, then there's no reason that it isn't still that it doesn't still exist. So, but every second that passes, whatever's left of those original negatives or color separation masters are degrading. Star Wars, the opportunity to do this gets away from us with every passing hour. So that's part of what made me get in and do what I could, because I just wanted to know that somewhere, that original version of Star Wars, the one that changed my life and changed so many, at least somewhere it's safe. Even if it's on a hard drive in a safety deposit box, even if it will never see the light of day until I'm dead or whatever, at least that little part of history, to the very best that I could possibly do, was safe. I did not know working on it that I was actually going to be able to turn out images at that quality. And I'm a super fan at looking at them just like anybody else. Do I feel that the special edition is disrespectful to the people that worked on the shots? I can tell you that many of the people who did work on the original shots feel that way. I can tell you that. I don't know if they've ever said that publicly, but they certainly said it to me privately. But again, it wasn't necessary. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why all that may have gone down, but really all that it becomes academic. Because Star Wars, the original Star Wars, actually did all the... I mean, it made... We're still making Star Wars movies today. That's how powerful it was. And you can't see it at all. It's completely gone. And maybe in really real, tangible ways will never be able to be brought back. Is that right? Anyway, you'll have to go to County Kerry in Ireland, where they made episode 5, 6, 7. It's breathtaking. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I haven't seen much of those new films. Anyway, like I said, you can go to my Vimeo channel and see much more in-depth and higher resolution versions of this stuff. But just today on the 25th, while I think about all of the sacrifices that have been made to make my life possible, I also think about the film that was made, which made my life possible. It's just that I'm not a traditional Star Wars fan. I learned that. A lot of people, I don't care about Luke Skywalker and the Rebellion, and I don't care about TIE fighters. I like the fact that film, like any piece of art, can change people's lives. And I keep all the Star Wars stuff around me because it changed my life. And it's a reminder of my responsibility as an artist to always do the very best I can, because what if it changes somebody's life? So it just happened to be that Star Wars was the most influential film in my life. So R2's here, and I have like a Star Wars museum in my house. But it's not actually about Star Wars. It's about the men and women that made it, George Lucas that thought of it and created it, and the impact that it had on culture and on filmmaking and technology and marketing and advertising and just about everything. It's all a reminder to me of the power and potential that lies inside of art. So for that reason alone, I just feel like, boy, does it deserve a little protected place somewhere. So what was the response to my presentation? Universally positive. Star Wars changed a lot of people's lives. And Star Wars, has a kind of weird light around it. And no shortage of people who work in the business are in the business simply because of that film. So any opportunity to see it in a new way, to see it at a new level, to see it with new fidelity, I've never had anybody react negatively to it. It's usually a lot of, oh my God, holy shit. That's usually what it is. Everybody turns into a kid again. So, and that was true whether it was, no matter what executives that have seen it or whatever. But, it's also a property, just property. It's just property with profit potential. And if those are the people that ultimately make those decisions, then it would be my job or anybody else's job to say, okay, yeah, you're not a Star Wars fan, but you can increase the quarterly profit by a shit ton margin by doing this. That's true. First of all, it's true, and then it's also the right thing to do. Now that sounds like a win-win to me. Well, we'll see. We will see. In any case, so that's it. Thanks everybody for watching. I'm not gonna. This video will we can come back and do more live stuff for questions, all that. But like I said, you want to see more, and if you really want to see, I mean, every one of these shots, breaking it down, how I did it, how the tools work, and there's a lot of stuff I didn't show. There's lots, because it's been years and years of working on it. Then just go to my Vimeo channel. That's easy to find because I always use my name. It's just Mike Verta. Just look it up. It's on Vimeo, and then there's like a little, channel for it where you can get all these videos. It's called the Legacy Edition Restoration, yeah, go check those out, and then you'll see more of what I'm up to. But there you go. All right, anybody. Well, so we'll come back in a couple of minutes just after we end this stream, just to take any other questions that you have or talk about, if you want to talk about special editions, we'll do that. But for now, thanks again for watching. Happy true Star Wars Day. This is the real Star Wars Day. And we'll see you again soon. How about that? How about that VLC? Oh, that made me so mad. Oh, that made me so mad. It was working fine. You know how that's how it is. Live shows. That's the thing about live. There's just going to be that, except I don't have a crew. It's just me. Well, I have a little crew sometimes. So something goes south, I got to deal with it myself. You should have seen the insanity that was on my other screen during that VLC stuff. It was just like garbage. Garbage, and video was half on one screen and half on another. There were no controls for the videos. It was just pandemonium and open source nonsense. I was just like trying to click, and then my cursor was like leaving trails behind the cursor. It's like it just got worse and worse and worse. And so I was just like, I kept thinking, well, if I could just stay calm, like I can work it out. I'll just refresh. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. So at the point that I'm just cutting to the technical difficulties, that we're having legit ones. It was so bad. But that's just live. But regardless, we got the info out, and that's the first time any of the legacy stuff has ever been seen on YouTube. I mean, which would be considered kind of going wide with it. But it's been so many years. It's been almost 20 years. It's not really a secret. So we'll find out. If my whole channel gets shut down in an hour, then you'll know. You'll know that was probably not the best idea. But then again, if it does, it's not like I monetize my channel, right? But yeah, it's been I don't look at it all the time, but anytime I've gone back and looked at that Star Wars restoration, anytime I've looked at it, I've just been like, holy shit, that looks good. I just forget, and then that always gets me charged up to want to, like, oh man, we got to get this thing out there, and You weren't gray when I started this. That's true. That's true. Holy shit, that's true. It's been a long time. But I don't know. I don't really even know why I'm so patient about it, but I always have been, just because I've just felt like, just let it play out, man. I've always had sort of unshakable optimism about it. Not because I'm naive. I'm not 20 anymore. I don't believe that just because a thing is great, that it will exist. I don't believe that it's unsuppressible. There's all sorts of unrecognized genius people who just died broken, penniless, and forgotten in ditches like miserable swines. That happens. But there's just something about Star Wars, about this original version, that I just feel like, how can you keep that thing down forever? So I hope you don't get hounded too much to release it now. I've been hounded. I've done all the hounds. All the hounding has already happened. And you know what? People in the Star Wars restoration community, because of course there's a restoration community, are generally really, really angry with me about it, because I have never released it. And they're already releasing it, so making the argument to them, hey, look, I'm not going to release it. It's not the right. I'll get in trouble. That already doesn't mean anything to anybody. So that's not an argument to make. And plus, you could just say, well, you're not really even allowed to you're not really allowed to scan it and put it in your bedroom and say, all right, yeah, this is. But sooner or later, I mean, I know for a fact the powers that be take a look at a project like that, and it's just like, well, there you're sitting on something, gets you in a whole lot of trouble if you even blinked. Yeah, I mean, I've had that told me in many ways, but I wouldn't anyway. Because I don't think it's necessary, and I just, I don't know, man. It's not the right thing to do for a film that meant that much to me. And I want everybody to see Legacy. I want everybody to see it. Of course I do. But I wouldn't kill all of its karma and all of its good. I just wouldn't do that. It's just, I don't know. I wouldn't do it. Well, obviously, because I haven't done it in 20 years. But so I've already caught just all the shit you could ever catch, and it didn't sway me. Because my allegiance to Star Wars, I guess, is greater than it is to people yelling at me in chat rooms. But I've also, been real clear, because I know what goes into any one of those restorations, and it's a weird place to be at, where I know it's coming. I know, even if it's a misguided effort, there are some out there that are, like, to me, just dramatically misguided. I still know it's coming from a place of, it's coming from here. It's coming from a love of Star Wars. You know what I mean? It's not like, so it's really hard for me to really, like, shit on efforts that people have done. And also, I meant it when I said, it's a fuck ton of money has been spent on this. Way more just in the R&D. Nobody would do this. It's crazy. It's fiscally, it is logistically irresponsible of me to have spent as much money and as many years of my life on this stupid restoration. It makes no sense. It's crazy. It's it's silly. It's also fantastic, and there's nothing like it. So I mean, it's all those things, and if ever it got to be that people got to see that film in that light, to see it like that, man, it would be all worth it. Almost no matter what had to happen, it'd be worth it. So. Yeah, just drop it off at the Library of Congress. Man, Library of Congress has some versions of it. I don't think they officially acknowledge that, but they do. How's the quality of the soundtrack? The highest quality of the soundtrack that anybody could ever in a million years hope for is totally gettable, exists, and people sympathetic to the cause would participate and cooperate should that happen. That's the best way to say that. Just like everything else, there's a source for those things, and there are people who care about the legacy and contribution to that film that would they just but they're not going to show up or do anything until till the dance is on. So so it's just. The dance ain't on yet, as far as I'm concerned. So, but yeah, man, it's especially with all the Star Wars films that came out. I've always thought this. I've just thought, man, it'd be such a gas to release a new Star Wars film and do a binge watch. Like you buy your ticket and you can see the original one before you see the new one. But this version of it. That was literally better. It's not just cleaned up. It's not just restored. I mean, it's Star Wars like no one's ever seen. Like the fact that that's even a possibility. Like literally, no, it's like a new Star Wars. It's like we found the negative that had been missing forever. It's like that. It would not be a repackage. It would not be just gussied up with a little color. It would be like, holy shit, yeah, that one could be in theaters. I think people would dig that. I would dig that. Somebody said if anyone would spend inordinate amounts of time and money on projects just to have it look as good as possible, it would be you. That's probably true. Didn't you say that that I spent over 10K on my TARDIS? 10K? 10K was just one set of the fiberglass poles, my friend. A fucking lamp on top was $6,000. And why? Because what else are you going to do with your money? But I'm like a 5-year-old with money. That's the problem. That's why I just spend it on everything. It's like, I have that much money. Yeah, that sounds fun. But then you just go make more money. Just learn to do a lot of shit, then you can make money, and then you can, has everybody eaten? Good, right? All the bills paid? Yeah, got the lights on? Yeah, okay, then how about let's make a kit car, and I'll be Michael Knight or whatever. It's like, to me, that's the way to live. The voices have always been tinny. Oh, not necessarily. There's stuff in there. Hey, baby.
Hi.
Hi.
Say hi.
Hi. We're talking about Star Wars.
Yeah. Hi, guys.
Not for this restoration, but have you ever messed around with tools like Topaz? I've seen every restoration tool that's out there, and they're all successful to varying degrees. The thing that they almost always have in common is that they're destructive. They paint, they change, and then we can argue about whether it's better or worse. But like I said, the guts, the spirit of this restoration was about, well, what if we didn't? What if we knew that stuff was in there instead of putting it in there, or smearing it out, or hiding it? What if we actually drew it out? And it's an infinitely better. It's just that you can't normally do that, because normally your restorations are being done already from the highest quality source. That's it. That's the negative. Now you can decide to degrain that, but there's no other version of the film that has less grain in it. That's it. That's the negative. But with a thing like Star Wars, it's probably not the negative anymore. So that's what motivated this in the first place. And Star Wars is not the only film that could use this. But with that process, now you're just making choices about all the contributing factors. And if it's great prints plus whatever's left of the negative, then you're in a situation where you can come up with an image quality that's never been seen. So, you'd like to hear me talk more about the audio? The real expert for the audio is actually in the chat room here. It's Dave Fine. And last he knows everything about it. And I know he's not the only one, but he's certainly the first person and last person I would go to consult about the audio. And Dave, if you want to get hounded, you're free to put your contact information. But Dave is in many ways involved in audio restoration and the releasing of projects, and Dave is in possession of things I can't believe in terms of Star Wars audio. Fidelity, quality, separation, stuff that audio is not Star Wars' problem. Visuals are Star Wars' problem. Of the 15% that's remaining, what's the most troubled scene to be done? I tried to work on the hardest stuff. That shot of Mos Eisley, that needs another. When I look at it, it was this huge thing to get it to where it is. With the one going by, with the land spear going by, it was so much work getting it to that I didn't want to look at it anymore. I know now I would put another month or two on that shot because there's more in there. There's once you figure out it's going to work, then you're like, okay. Now, and you learn how to do a shot by doing it. Every one of those shots, the one that you see is like the third iteration. Like you go through the whole process, and then at the end you're like, okay, now if I had to start over, I would do this. And then you go back and you do it again. And then about the third pass, you're like, I don't know what else I could possibly do. That shot in particular, I would keep working on. All the film that was shot in the Death Star, all the Death Star stuff. By that point in the film, they made a change in the way that they shot it. They took all the diffusion off the lens. There's all the shots before that had a very romantic, diffuse look to them, which can actually trip up film restoration tools, and it can blur things out or eat glints out of people's eyes. It's supposed to have a very romanticized, glowy, hazy kind of look. that also makes all the photography kind of soft. And on top of that, the actual lenses that they shot Star Wars with, what I believe these Bausch and Lomb lenses, were not very sharp. The lenses themselves, the photography was not super sharp, not like we're used to today. So we have an expectation that the images need to be sharper when they never were. But as soon as you cross into the stuff that shot in the Death Star, all the interior shots, as I recall, by that point, 20th Century was like, you got to take all this fucking haze off. And so the images are way sharper, starting from all that footage. So all the Death Star stuff tends to be easier to clean up. The Tatooine stuff, for all sorts of reasons, is much harder and requires the most amount of work. But I think the shots that I've done are already the hardest ones, because that's why they were so crappy and that's why they were cut out. But that's also why the before and afters are so profound when you look at them, because they have the furthest to go. There are shots like, of stuff in the hangar before they're going out to fight at the end there, that you look at them and you're like, man, this hardly needs anything. Like, there's tons of fidelity in the color. The focus is great. Everybody's. So there's whole sections of the film that, they're not that far. But the stuff in the first 20 minutes or whatever that is, however long that is before they get out of there, 20, 30 minutes, 40? I don't know. Before they get off Tatooine, that's where your hardest work is. Yeah. What was the most difficult shot to restore? Yeah, outside of that one, it was maybe the Death Star explosion or one of the other ones where there's a million things going on and it becomes difficult to tell. Like anything where things are, like when the X-Wings do this stuff, you have to look really, really carefully for the details to line up so that dust and dirt and stuff can get out of there. Those were tricky, but the Death Star stuff has all these little there's luminance variations in the exposure that you have to be really, really, really careful to protect. So that you don't blow out highlights, but you also don't, you don't lose things in shadows and you don't blow out things in the highlights. You have to protect those things very, very carefully to get the maximum out of the film without introducing things that weren't supposed to be seen, Offhand, I don't remember, because all I think about when I think about difficult are the really difficult ones. Otherwise, they're all hard. They all took, those shots are weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. It was like 10, 15 years. It was a long time. The yellow color blobs? Oh, yeah. Well, let me bring that up. Here, I'll bring up a video. Oh, wait, can I do that? I don't know if I can do that. Let me try. Yeah, this is a whole... I don't know if I did. Let me see here. I'm looking at, okay, so this is that's if this works. All right. Let's just blow that up just a little bit. So this is a film print of that Mos Eisley shot, and they're talking about the yellow blobs. You can just see the color. I mean, it's blobs of yellow. It's like this what it looks like. It just looks like it's just horrible. And so on first blush, when you see that stuff, your thought is, well, there's nothing in there to do. I can't get anything out of it. There's nothing to get. It's it's just garbage. And if you look up at the blue sky, it's just all polluted. And it's been so long, I'd have to watch my own video on this to remember all the things that I had to do. But it was essentially, there's the special edition shot where they actually pulled, so they pulled the original photography for this shot. And I was like, oh, wow, there you go. It was really depressing to see how much was in there, but then this got goofy for all kinds of other reasons. But I remember, wow, there were like, telephone wires in there. And so that made me, I remember obsessing about it. Like, can I get to the telephone wires? Out of that, are there telephone wires in there somewhere? But on the special edition, too, there's all these blobby people and stuff. But in my restoration, I eventually did find those telephone poles or telephone wires. But But yeah, here I was showing a little bit about how I had to teach the computer how to reassign aspects of the frame, like as it goes through the color channels, how to teach it to reassign certain qualities to other qualities. That's sort of the restoration in a nutshell, where it goes, well, you know, every time you see this sort of thing, it should be more like this. And like I said, there's a whole video on this. But it was a question of teaching it to reassign information in one channel and use that, recruit that information in other ways. In some ways, the entire shot will be rebuilt. Yeah, you can just barely see the telephone wires in there. The shot will be rebuilt simply to recover the details in the luminance. In fact, they're always like this. The luminance and the details are one part of the process, and then color is a separate process. And that's that way for a lot of reasons, not least of which is because we get our sense of sharpness, we get our sense of detail in the luminance. And we are a lot more forgiving of fidelity problems in color than we are in luminance. So it's I'm grossly oversimplifying the process, but a lot of it is using the data that's in there in other ways. And that is experimentation, and that's shot by shot by shot. You have to just figure out, okay, where can I find the stuff that's in this shot? But because you're not painting anything, because you're not creating anything, it's either in there or it's not. You know, it's not. You're not destroying anything. You're only ever revealing. It's pass fail. It works or it doesn't. It makes it better or it makes it worse. And sometimes it's just guesswork. Sometimes it's intelligent guesswork. You know, sometimes it's application of a technique that one shot reminds you of another shot, and you do it like that. Oh, the ships leaving Yavin 4 couldn't have been too easy. Oh, you mean the like which one? This one? This one? Yeah, not easy. None of them are easy. But this one in particular, I think this is, you might want to put that on the screen there. Oh, sorry. If you mean this one, none of them are easy, but in a shot like this, the thing that you have to watch all the time is you don't want to lose any of those tree leaves because they're already not like super sharp. And you also do not want to lose any of those little ships that are flying away. But you don't want to create new, like you have to, yeah. And you have to protect the luminance, and you have to, and like I remember the antenna on this guy's helmet is a dead giveaway for things that use degraining algorithms or temporal smoothing, because that immediately gets lost. It gets eaten out as he swings his head around. Because it doesn't exist in the same place from one frame to another. We talked about that in the last video. So, things like that, which are normally the dead giveaways, the bane of existence for restoration stuff, those are also the very first place that a trained eye will go to look and be able to tell how it was done. So the fact that those sorts of things are, actually get preserved in this process, that's like the holy grail. It's so great. I mean, if you, let's see what we got here. In my opinion, the worst change made on the special editions. Well, I mean, the ones that interrupt dramatic flow. I mean, obvious, like I talked about the Mos Eisley example. I mean, that's just filmmaking 101. In film, when you have the people at the bar say, "Have you heard Big Bart's in town, the meanest, nastiest, sharpest shooter there ever was," and then the door goes, "Ee!" That's Bart, and now the audience is prepared that everybody's in trouble. If you follow, Black Bart's in town, and then immediately it's fart noises and shit, you lose, and then when the guy comes in, you're like, you've killed it. That's just filmmaking 101. That's just drama. And there's so many mistakes like that in the film. That does to me are always going to be the ones that are most egregious, the ones that, hold on, you just literally crapped all over your, like now you don't need that scene. You don't need to prep the audience that it's dangerous if the very first thing you're going to show them is that not only is it not dangerous, it's a zany, wacky place full of, okay. You have to get the audience back up to speed now, which there's no scene to do it because that was your scene. So things like that, when, obviously the Han shooting first thing is a big, that's, no matter which reason that you think that went down, and there's great reasons for it, that's ridiculous that the other guy ever gets a shot off or shoots at all. It's not the point. And I've never heard one argument that wasn't retarded about that. For whatever reason, that's like a lightning rod, but that's just, didn't need to fix it, was perfectly fine, said everything that you wanted to about the character, including we're not sure if he's a good guy or a bad guy. That's important dramatically when you pair your good guys up with him. See, then the audience isn't sure if this guy Han Solo can be trusted because he just killed somebody. He's obviously in a rough town. Like, that's an important thing dramatically. But when it's now in just self-defense, the character doesn't have, and now he doesn't have a redemption arc, because all he cared about was himself and his debts and all this stuff, and at the end he comes back, and you fuck with the film on a very basic level when you make those changes. Those are dramatic changes. I always have the biggest issue with those. Then when you put in visuals that don't match the visuals around them, and then immediately become dated, it's like, well, that's why you don't put them in, because that's not what the film looked like. The CG couldn't do that then. The model couldn't do that then. Compositing couldn't do that then. And now your shot sticks out immediately and doesn't fit aesthetically with the rest of the film, and you can't miss it. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It doesn't belong in the film because you can see it. And there's no reason for it when the original shots are perfectly effective. There's just no reason for it. So, but like I said, a lot of people will go, but I don't mind them, so they're good. Some of them I don't mind either, but they're bad. They don't belong there. And if you want to do that, if you want to have what if we just remade Star Wars today? You could do that film. But you don't shit can and make disappear for the rest of time the actual film that started everything. You have to understand, it's gone. it's not like it's a niche product. It's gone since 1997. This is very similar to when we electronics engineers use high resolution in an oscilloscope. It relies on the fact that the waveform is repetitive, and as they stack, you get more and more detail. Oh yeah, I'm sure. There's no way. I didn't think up the idea of pulling multiple sources together for a better. It's not like I just hadn't seen anybody go through the unreasonable amount of work it would take to do. I think that's the only reason I got invited to speak, is not because it was such a genius idea, is because I was just nutty enough to do it. Have I noticed anything I didn't notice first? Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. My favorite one is on the video channel, and it's this misaligned, it's the thing in the opening shot where the laser bolts, the explosions from the laser bolts are completely misaligned. They're like a frame late, and you can see it clear as day. And I found that one, and I found a couple things written on, go look on the Vimeo channel. There's stuff like that. Yeah, the flash frames, yeah. But yeah, I mean, and by the way, as much, there's a little side conversation going on here about some of the audio stuff. I mean, yeah, man, as crazy as I've gone about the visuals, there are people who have gone equally crazy about audio and about the versions and the sources. And I mean, it's just that I could just tell you that the audio fares infinitely better than the visuals, because there's no audio in Star Wars that is as degraded as that Mos Eisley shot is visually. There's just not. That said, there's huge gradients in quality and different levels of ability. It's just that's just a thing. Even if you have good sensibilities for audio, if you don't have the actual materials, there's only so much you can do. If you have the materials and all you have to mix on is your laptop speakers, you're in a disadvantage to somebody who's working in a $1 million, mixing facility. You know what I mean? There's lots of things that get in the process that might ultimately determine the quality of the end product. It always seemed like sound-wise Empire was a leap ahead. Well, they certainly learned a lot. Yeah, Star Wars was, nobody knew Star Wars. Look, it's all over it. Nobody knew what it was. It was a gig. It was a B movie. And if you've ever seen it before, the sound effects, it looked ridiculous. And nobody knew what it was going to be. And everybody was surprised by it. The people working on it were like, what? So by the time that they knew what it was and came to Empire, it had a lot more, commitment in it. Somebody was asking if Dave, a resident sound expert, he knows other people who are great too, if he'd be doing a video. Said he's considered, maybe Mike and I should record a video chat. Yeah, Dave, come over sometime. We'll do it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'll get my subscribers from 12,000 to 12,002. No, yeah, I'd love to do that, sir. We'd absolutely do that because Dave could talk forever. Dave knows everything. It's my endorsement. And they are interesting. They're also totally geeked out, But that's part of the thing for me about the restoration is that there's going to be those levels. There's going to be the levels in which people are, really talking about the technicals, the things that are going on visually or the things that are going on audio, and they nerd out about them. And that's totally fine and fun. But what I also like about this sort of process is that if you know none of it, if you know nothing, you don't have to be a geek to be able to see the insane difference between Star Wars and the restoration. And that to me is like, yeah, this isn't just for nerds who can't, who want to live in the Star Wars world because they can't handle the real one and don't have girlfriends. This is, I don't care who you are, even if you're just a casual fan of the franchise or you've heard of it, here it is, obviously way, 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 way better. Why not? So, yeah, 6 feet apart. Fuck no, not in my house. You sit right here, and no masks, any of that shit. Why does the 2004 mix sound so bad compared to the 19? Dave will have to tell you that. In any case, it's been a really, really rewarding process. It's been a really hard one, and it's taught me a lot about the film. But what never happened, is it never got old. Star Wars has never gotten old for me. Again, when I watch it, I'm not really looking at the Empire, and I'm not really looking at the TIE fighters. I'm looking at Harrison's matte paintings, and I'm listening to Ben Burtt's sound, and I'm looking at all the amazing production design, and I'm looking at the model photography, and I'm listening to John Williams' music that made me knew what I was going to do with my life when I was 5. And that never does get old. Like watching masters do a masterful job and have the sum total be greater than its parts would never get old. It's always like, holy shit, that's good. That just never gets old. I think if I was just one of those people that refers to the rebellion as we, I think it might have gotten old. But that's just a different type of fandom. I don't take that away from people either. I mean, I don't go to conventions, but if that's your thing, it's all beautiful when the reason you're going is because a piece of art changed your life. As an artist and a creative professional, how could I not support that? That may not be my thing, but whenever I see cosplayers and stuff, I'm like, that's not my thing. But why are they doing that? It's because somebody made a film. What if you made a film and everybody loved it so much they want to dress up like it all the time? Yeah, it'd be awesome. That would be a great thing. So I can never disparage people's fandom because of why they have the fandom. For a creative professional, my whole life, that's always worth celebrating. Even when it's just like, you nutty Star Wars wedding having people. By the same token, yeah, but why? Yeah. Can I speak about my approach to the presentation of the dynamic range in the image? So this thing about HDR displays, there are no HDR displays. That misnomer, I mean, I could do a whole video on why there is no high dynamic range. In visual effects, in CG, we have the only real version of high dynamic range. And that's not something we can see, it's something that the computer can understand. When we're lighting images using a pixel that appears white, but its actual value is 1,000,000, that allows our light simulations to know, oh, that's not a white light, that's a sun, and it changes the calculation of the light. Unless our displays were as bright as the goddamn sun, then we're not increasing the dynamic range of our displays. You know, that's the high dynamic range. The high dynamic range means that the distance, the dynamic range between the darkest darks and the brightest brights, just in terms of photon energy, is much, much, much higher. What we see all the time that's called high dynamic range is tone mapping. And that's where you take things that would normally be blown out and you remap them so that they're still visual, but you haven't actually increased the photon energy coming off the display. It's not actually any higher dynamic range. It's tone mapped to reveal more things that are in the luminance, more things that are in the exposure range, but the image itself is not higher dynamic range. It's tone mapping. There's a very specific word for it. And the fact that those things get conflated is a nightmare to people who work with actual HDR images all the time. We use high dynamic range images all the time in CG, and they look just like regular images. But buried in the data is the actual luminance value of individual pixels, regardless of what it looks like. So those are the only real high dynamic images, and you can't tell looking at them. You can't, I mean, if they're well tone mapped, you can't tell you're looking at a high dynamic range image. The computer can, and then it only needs to know it. It only does anything with it if it's driving a light transport algorithm in a rendering engine. That's the only time it's ever used. The rest of this time, we're high dynamic range. That's just fucking tone map. If you turned on your TV and it blew out your eyeballs, now your sun is going to be as bright as a sun and your shadows are going to be as dark as a shadow. That's a high dynamic range image, and we don't have that except for the one that's outside when you're not watching TV. When we did the presentation, actually in the theater, it was done on a digital projector. It was very carefully controlled. It looked fantastic. It was in a theater. It was at 4K, and it was off a digital projector. And although we did have discussions about how an ultimate master for a restoration like this would probably be to film it out at the end. To film it out at the end, and that way have actual film grain on it, even though the top film grain simulations now are amazing. Still, the way to really do it would really, But at the time the screening was done on whatever that was, I want to say, I don't remember what that projector was. It was the top projector at the time, 4K projector, and it looked great. I had never seen it fully, like where a team had made sure that the input file that I had created came out the projector exactly the way it was supposed to. And I remember standing at the podium and looking at the screen, and I lost track of what I was doing because it looked way better than I expected. Even on my calibrated reference monitors, where I knew exactly what it looked like, that I just hadn't seen that 20 feet across. I'd seen little interim versions of it, but I remember at the presentation I was like, holy shit. It was great. And I remember I had to, oh wait, what am I talking about? Grading wise, there's minimal grading, very minimal grading on any of the shots that you've seen of mine tonight. Mostly because I know at this stage in the restoration, that can kind of be done at any time, and the way that you do it properly is to grade using the same philosophy and tool set that original photochemical grading would have been done. Today, we power window the shit out of everything in Resolve, and you can make anything, but that's not what the film was, and it doesn't need to be done. So when I have done, I use Resolve in a very carefully controlled, all my walls are N7, they're Munsell N7, and they're lit by very specific D50 lights, and my monitors are all calibrated, they're all ISO monitors, they're really, really, I work in a color critical bay that I can trust, that's perfectly calibrated. So I do Resolve in that, but in this case, it's always like, I've never used any Resolve stuff, it's just the basics, just your basic, how you do it. And when you approach it the way that grading would have been done, it reveals itself, and you can see it. It's like, oh, that's what it would be, because that's all it could have been, and it's right. And plus, you have a lot of reference images, and I have stuff from private photos from the people who made it, and reference stuff that they shot off, and I have lots of other stuff. But the grading could kind of be done at any time. But if you were going to grade it, really finally grade it, the way to do it would not be to power window everything and make it all fix this and add this. And no. You don't need to. It's all in there. You just got to just let it be what it is. That's the way to do that, in my opinion. So how would I approach an HDR grade? Well, so there's where you're getting into a thing that's important, which is about being a student of the aesthetic. And that's a thing. In fact, it's a weird thing that a not small part of my professional career has been spent in various capacities being an aesthetic policeman. It's a really weird thing, but I've been hired not infrequently by brands or whatever that are making new product, or are trying to make collections of things, and my whole job is to say what is and what is not the aesthetic. I don't know why, but that's just something I sort of fell into. And a lot of that was when I was the project manager for one of the attractions at the Avatar Pandora World thing in Disney World. A lot of it was that for whatever else was coming down through Lightstorm and Cameron and Imagineers, there were all sorts of little things that happen at a vendor level where you have to make a decision. Is it this switch or is it this kind of switch? Is it this kind of rounding? Imagineering is going to have to pee on everything anyway, but it was one of my jobs to go, that's Avatar, that's not Avatar, that's not Avatar, that's Avatar. It's just a thing. And so you can develop a sense of the aesthetic. It's true musically. I know John's harmonic language. It's why you can write in that aesthetic without cribbing the exact pieces and not doing a pastiche. You can actually learn the language, learn the aesthetic. And you have to know the aesthetic of Star Wars in order to be able to do a restoration, because anytime you come up against something that is not explicitly clear, you have to know, well, what would it be? And if you really have made a study of the aesthetic, your guesses are going to be pretty good. I built R2 because I'd finished with the CG one, and the CG one, I uncrated 3 of the originals, and I'd shot terabytes of reference data, and my CG model was exactly every little detail of it, every little nick was off one of the originals, and so I had this complete blueprint of how to do it, so I just built him. He's just like the ones in 77. But all of that trains you for a specific aesthetic. And that's true if you're studying photography, if you're studying sound, if you're studying music, if you're studying grading, anything. You have to know the aesthetic of the film. And, a lot of people, a surprising number of people who may be licensees or vendors in the Star Wars world don't know Star Wars that well. They just, I'll tell you this about the Lucasfilm archives. I've been to the archives tons of times. Almost everybody I know knows the stuff in the archives better than the archivists. They can tell you everything about every little detail. Oh, that helmet, that's the one, and he got this, and this was on the exhibition in 1981. And then they tell you every last little thing. That's just always how it is. It's a whole world. But how I would approach an HDR grade would be to make sure, if I was supposed to do that, to make sure that the aesthetic of the tone mapping matched what clearly the intent of the photography was. And that would be to not, if a shot was supposed to be more contrasty for a certain reason, if it was clearly an aesthetic choice, don't just remap all the shadows so that now you can see all the stuff that was supposed to be crushed out. But you find that balance about where can I find detail, and it doesn't rob the attention photographically from where the original photography was intending to put the viewer's attention. Because that can happen. You can lose track of what matters in the film and start, changing all sorts of other things, being like, that's cool, I never saw that before. That's cool, I never saw that before. That's cool, you weren't supposed to. Now your attention's all kinds of places. It needs to be here. Again, that requires both a dramatic sensibility and sensitivity and also an aesthetic one. So if it was actually that, I think I would probably be making my case for, okay, here is a well-represented, here's the most aesthetically true representation of the full range of exposures in that photography, and make the case for why it should be this versus like, oh no, we should pull all the highlights that were supposed to be blown down. That happens in a lot of the restorations. All the Tanavi stuff in those Lowry restorations is way too dark. You could see the highlights better, but it wasn't supposed to be that. They're supposed to be blown out a little bit, and it makes it feel like it's top lit and a little bit oppressive. So if you just simply went by protecting all of your exposure values, you end up with a frame that's too dark. That's what happens. Do I think HDR is the future? No, I don't. It's just a buzzword. It doesn't actually mean anything. Like I said, it doesn't mean anything. And I look at it the same way I looked at it like when 3D came out. I was like, yeah, right, 3D. Yeah, they're trying that one again? That's not going to last. It doesn't make me Nostradamus. It's just a gimmick. Do I still have the D1 Laserdisc tapes? Yeah, somewhere in storage. Still good versions of the 81 crawl. Yeah, the crawl I worked out pretty much. So, but yeah, I have. So the display are fake. They're not fake. They're just mislabeled. There's nothing high dynamic range about them. They're tone mapping. They are not putting out 200 million to 1 contrast ratios. The actual lumens coming off the screen is not profoundly brighter. You're not looking at one of those displays going, holy shit. Right, because the actual photon energy coming off of the phosphors and pixels is not brighter. That's where your dynamic range is. Being able to see things so that you have more gradients between this bright, this bright, this bright, and this bright is tone mapping. Your eyes can do that for real out in the real world. That's why your camera sees the world totally differently than your eyes do. Your eyes have a much greater dynamic range. We can see a shadow while the sun is over here. A camera has to, you kind of got to pick one because it's got a compressed dynamic range, even if it's 14, 15 stops. So, but in order to actually have a high dynamic range image, the display would have to have a higher potential dynamic range. And they're not. They don't. They do not. It's just a word. It's tone mapping. And it's not how, 99% of the time, it's not how things are shot. It's not anticipated. When we make exposure choices as in photography, we're choosing a bracket for that exposure. It's supposed to be here. It can't just be all here. And if it can be all here, when we get more exposure ranges in photography, when we get cameras that have wider exposure range, we may light to take advantage of it. We may take advantage of the extra dynamic range. But still inside of that, there is a target exposure that we're planning for, and we're not expecting that entire bracket to be slid and moved in some other place. It's going to reveal things in the photography. It's not that random. It's not, we make choices. So, so when frame rates are screwed with or tone mapping is screwed with, hey, nobody involved meant it to be that. Don't, what is this, some TV is telling you how your images is going to look? Get out of here. Lowry Digital compresses high dynamic range into visible color range to get clarity. It removes the high range, and by doing that process years ago, everyone's expectations changed. Well, again, it may be, right, but it's still a misnomer. Because there is such a thing as HDR. HDRI, we use it, like I said, light transport algorithms use it every single day to light. It changed the world in CG. All of our light transport and path tracing algorithms and global illumination, all of that fundamentally changed the photorealism in CG with the introduction of actual high dynamic range imagery. So that's a real thing. I used it this morning for real. So it's not a fancy version of sharpening. It is not. It's very specifically designed to recover, to perceptually recover a wider degree of of dynamic range in an image than you're normally accustomed to seeing, except it's garbage in, garbage out. It's either there, it's that. And if your display isn't actually putting out brighter stuff, it's tone mapping. It's what it is. You think about, so here's I'll try to explain it again. This is an oversimplification, but let's say that your values from lightest to brightest are 0 to 255. 255 is white. On your screen, once it hits 255, it's white. It can't get whiter than white. It's 255. Okay, so you've only got 255 steps between the whitest of whites and the blackest of blacks. Again, don't get up my ass. I know this is an oversimplification. But the truth is that in the real world, if that white dot may actually be as bright as the sun, but even if it is, the camera still can't record it as anything other than white. It's still going to be 255. That's how bright it is, because it can't. But when you're actually standing there, you can't even look at it because it's as bright as the sun. By the time you look at a picture, it's just white dot. And so if you had a piece of white paper right next to this little dot as bright as the sun, in the real world, one you could look at and one you could not. On the screen, they're both white. They're both 255 because it's not an actual high dynamic range. White is white. It's a limited dynamic range. So all of our displays, all of our cameras are ultimately low dynamic range compared to our eye. But the truth is, what happened with high dynamic range images is we could tell the computer, yeah, I know it looks white, but it's not 255. It's going to say 255 on the screen. It's going to look like the same as 255, but it's actually a million. It's in the background. It's in the metadata of the file. So when we have a rendering engine that goes to simulate light, if we can say, okay, here's a picture that we took of the sun on the beach, but it actually knows that the sun is 1,000,000, no matter what it looks like, the math inside of it can talk to the math in the rendering engine, and now it can simulate light with a power of 1,000,000. So it changes the lighting simulation. Because now if you have a light bulb or a piece of paper next to a thing that's 1,000,000, it will calculate the light coming off this differently than it will calculate the light coming off of it, because they're different values, even though they look exactly the same. So it's a perception thing. I don't know if that helps. Do I use CRTs, as many consider it better? There are many things that are better about it. No, I don't. At this point, no, I mean, I use good monitors. All my monitors are ISO monitors. You can look them up. They're color grading series. They're good. They're very good, and they're well calibrated. And you also have to always think about where your image is ultimately going. It's true with mixes. Like, you could have $1 million mixing studio, but you got to supervise your mixes on by the time it gets done to an MP3 on somebody's phone, it's still got to sound good. So when you do post-production in any capacity, you've always got to check in with how the rest of the world's going to see it. And you go into the world of television displays that are all wrong, every one of them wrong, every one of them deliberately wrong, deliberately different, all designed to compete with each other under these super bright lights in these box stores. They're all wrong. Every single TV that you buy is wrong. It's not what it looked like when we made it. And there's like this many people who ever go through the break-in time and then get their TVs calibrated. It's like maybe this many people. I do. And so all that work that you spend getting everything exactly right, and then it looks never different, everybody, and then they put it in game mode or vivid. Oh, fuck that! It's gone. But you have to do that. You got to check your stuff to see how the rest of the world's doing it. See how it's going to look. So, can I give them a graphic display? I mean, yeah. I could probably find a file. I probably have one. I have to. Yeah, I'll do that. I have to pull it off my server. So Mike, film prints could never demonstrate the improvement and range of today. Black in a theater is never black, right? So how do you feel about presenting the film with image improvements today? Well, right, that's a question, right? That's a great point, which is that, there's what's on the negative. This is the thing. And then there's what actually would get shown in a theater. Because there's a lot of things that are going to contribute to the contrast range in a theater, like Dave suggests, right? You're pushing light through the blacks. They're not perfectly black. There's also the ambient light, and in the theater, there's also how reflective the screen may be. Their screens have different qualities. If you're built a home theater, some screens can put back a lot more of the light energy than others can, all of which changes the perception of it. So if you're trying to figure out, well, what do I present? This can be maybe a slippery slope, but then I think it's also where you come to being a student of the aesthetic, is that a good cinematographer was aware of all of those things and would be shooting in anticipation of, like we do today, of an average target. It's going to look this way in the theater. We're going to shoot it like this so it looks like this. That's why they did camera tests. That's why Christopher Reeve's Superman costume was kind of aqua teal, because on film it looked blue. If you've actually ever seen them at fabric, it's not that color. But they did camera tests to find out the way. I did this when I was doing my TARDIS. There's a video on YouTube somewhere here of me going through the paint for my TARDIS color, and I shot it with a digital camera, and then next to it I shot it with a film camera. And you just look at the two colors; they're night and day. One's aqua, the other one's blue. There's always this idea when cinematographers would shoot that they're thinking about what it's going to do ultimately in a theater, what it's going to look like, and how much did they anticipate that? So, if you're a student of the aesthetic, then there's obviously got to be a way to find the balance where they go, okay, if they could have gotten super blacks, if they could have done this, they would have. But clearly this was the part of those detail shadows they were looking to preserve. These were clearly the parts they were looking to crush out. And the more you know about the luminance curves or the average reflectance of a screen in the 70s or whatever, then I think the more intelligently you could make those choices. I have absolutely nothing against using the technology to its fullest advantage and to represent the material in its greatest light. It's just that those choices can't be arbitrary. They must be guided by an awareness of the aesthetic and a technical awareness of what the expectations would have been. But you could take a film like Star Wars and you could project it digitally. And while it technically might outperform, I mean, this restoration outperforms anything that was ever on in a theater, hands down, no question about it. None of us ever saw Star Wars in a theater at that quality. No one print ever had that detail in it. So does that mean you don't do it? No, but it means that if you are going to do it, then you're aware of the fact that, okay, we got a lot more going on in this environment. So let's not turn it into something aesthetically different, into something, what is the thing which if they could have done, they would have done. That you have to know technically how to work that, aesthetically how to work that, and there will never be an absolute right or wrong, except for if maybe you still could talk to the cinematographers and you can't. So, but, that was some of the stuff when I was talking to Harrison Ellenshaw about the paintings. We had discussions about, like, well, what would he have done if it was today? Well, he would have done this differently, would have done this differently. I mean, now you could do this and now you could do this. Yeah, you could. But what was he doing and what was the expectation there? Okay, well, if we follow those guidelines, can we take the unified project, the unified sum total, and still, maximize luminance, maximize dynamic range, whatever, and it's not a different shot, it's the shot, and that's doable. That's doable. Fonzie's jacket was brown. And then there's the fact of noise. A 16-bit sensor with 4 bits of noise only has a dynamic range of 12 bits. NTSC back in the days, never twice the same color, yes. Never the same color, yeah. Yeah, well, and when I was doing all my post-production in NTSC, I mean, that's why you had calibrated reference monitors, because you would look at it on your display and you'd go, what the hell? And you'd spend half your life in the yellows and reds trying to figure out how to get it to look like, I mean, it was crazy. But film is also an organic medium, and those little silver halide crystals, would capture color differently. And you'd choose stock based on not how true it was, but on whether you liked aesthetically the ways in which it biased the image. After looking at multiple prints, what mysteries are you looking for answers to? Mysteries? I don't know. I mean, like some of the shots that are really degraded, like that famous Mos Eisley one where you can see the Vaseline. You know why they did it. It was because because if you've ever tried to do the little shadow thing, it doesn't work well. Like, the more detail in it, you can see the process. And then you realize, that's pass after pass after pass through the optical printer. It's optical. You're losing a stuff every time. You can see it. And what would be really sexy, and I think you could do this, but you can't as far as I know, is to be able to go back. Like, so they would take an X-Wing and a star field, and they composite the X-Wing and a star field. Or they'd have one X-Wing, and then they'd composite another X-Wing. Now they got 3 X-Wings and a star field. And they got 3 X-Wings and a star field and a Death Star. And every one of these passes through the optical printer is degrading the image. More grain, less fidelity, less sharpness, all that stuff. What would be really cool, in my opinion, and doable and wouldn't ruin anything is if you could go back to the original elements, the original blue screen elements, and composite them using today's technology. That would not technically be accurate. If you went back, you can see little black lines or little white lines, around the stuff. And from a purist standpoint, well, that's how it was back then. Our eyes go right to those things right now, and sometimes they're in danger of destroying taking the shot for granted because it's such a blatant error. If you could recomposite the elements today so that there was the exact same shot, the same representation, the same models, it just didn't have the compositing shit all over it, and they still kept their sharpness and clarity, I would probably put that in the category of that would be cool to see. You would never be able to win an argument that you had now not represented the original film. You are correct. The question is, did you use the technology in a way that, unless you happen to know there were matte lines around that shot, it's a weird target to be like, hey, where are the matte lines? The idea would be those things are no longer distracting. It's a slippery slope. There's no way to answer that question positive or negatively. I just think that would be a really cool thing to see. See the original individual negatives without the compositing and degradation of generational loss from optical compositing. It'd be everything about the shot, just the way they really shot him, only just with what we can do compositing digitally. I think I would love to see that. Just to see it. Just to see. Like, wow. I think the net effect would be that nobody would notice, and then they would have nothing to notice. They would just take the shot that much more for granted, and dramatically and aesthetically it would be more effective. That's just my guess. I've never done that. So But yeah. The image has been altered so much for the most recent releases that the original version looks completely different. Oh yeah, no, it's not the film anymore. I was working in the home theater business back in the mid-90s with huge CRT projectors. Oh, and the Ferrugia, is what it was? The laboratories have non-interlaced projectors. It was 50. Oh yeah, the technologies have gone through a lot of stuff, but so often, so often, again, those processes they're compensating for things instead of looking at a garbage in, garbage out model. It's like there's a lot of grain in the image, so let's figure out how to get the grain out of there, versus that's the image, and how do you present it in a way that you've got the best quality of it, but you're not just paint smearing all over whatever. It's just a thing. Why was the 2004 Master so magenta? I don't know. I don't know enough about. You'd have to be there. There are a lot of reasons it can go south. Sometimes it can happen between the master and the distribution, or the mastering and the manufacturing. Sometimes people can work in bays that aren't calibrated. They just get used to it a certain way. Sometimes the elements come in and they don't. There's like 900 ways in which a thing can get wrong. It's way more work to get it right. And mostly you have to remember that film restoration and business, it was not like people came in and it was the Holy Grail and they were carrying Moses' scriptures. It's a job. It's a job that can only afford so much money and so much time and so many bay hours and time on the books. And very often it's being done by people who are not like living and dying and breathing it, and they wouldn't be allowed to do 4,000 hours of overtime on it even if they wanted to. Certainly that was Lowry talked about that a lot. They had to bang that shit out. So even if you wanted to do everything, it was like there was just not the time. So if you really want to do it right, I've told people that when they talked about monetizing my process here, when they talked about doing it, I was like, I don't know how you do this. This will never make sense. I can't imagine how many millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, if in real man hours and time, this restoration would cost. But that wouldn't be the thing. I think it would be this really weird, unique, non-responsible business entity where everybody's putting in because it's the right thing to do. And you make what money you can, but you're not making money on it. You would not make money on this. Now, you could look at that and go, well, it's Disney. You can make money if you just tell them it's $100 million or something. But the truth is that they're not going to, that's not a corporate decision. A corporate decision isn't, it's the right thing to do. They're not even allowed to do that if they're publicly owned. They can't do something that devalues the stock price or the profit just because they think it's a good idea. They'd have to materially show that it's going to make the value of the company higher. So like I said, I've always known that if anybody actually came and said, hey, you want to do this, I'd say, I'd have to give them a budget I know they would ever in a million years go for, and I know it would never recoup its money. It just wouldn't. It just wouldn't. But that's not why you do it. You do other things. In your work, in your creative work, I think as a creative professional, you learn which ones are your money jobs because they are the ones that pay for the jobs that are love jobs. Those are the ones that, and those are usually the ones that are most fun. Those are the ones that are most satisfying, rewarding. I had no money, or they just, there's always, and then you just learn to balance. John was building supercomputer data centers. He was giddy when he would tell me that he had one of the world's fastest supercomputers for the work. Yeah, at the time, like I said, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. It's like a thing where I did one video in which, there's plenty of stuff in that Lowry restoration, lots of it, that's just embarrassing for everybody involved. And I know that. And so there's one part of me that always feels kind of bad being like, man, I know. I could just see it back in the day. By the same side, fucking lights are pink. You put that out, the lights are pink. There's like the shot of it's like the first shot of Reel 6, I think. It's the shot in the Yavin base. And the exposure's a mess, and all the lights are pink, And it's like, okay, you have to get shit for that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you put out lights that are pink. At some point you just I get it, I understand, I know the client you were rushing through, but I can't not, come on, I gotta hit you on that. I didn't show this shot during the thing, but it's one of the shots, matte paintings. This is the shot again, another shot that got redone. But this is a fucking matte painting. It's all matte painting except for a little section of light. You know, these are all matte painted dudes right up in the front. You know, I mean, I understand why they filmed new guys to stand there, because in HD, 20 feet across, those are fucking painted guys. There's no way you're getting around that. And I remember when I did this shot and I was working, I was like, well, what is it? What will it ultimately become? You know, and even restored here, I mean, it's a lot better, right? Because this is how it was in theaters, you know, like this. You know, so here it's not going to get better than that. The black points are equal, the color stuff, the seams between the stuff worked out, but yeah, that's painted guys. So, but to me, that's like, okay, that's fine, because honestly, if it's not distracting, you're still looking at the guys going down the stairs. It's only when you're looking at it for the 400th time that you look at the guys on the side. You know, I mean, I certainly understand why somebody would be like, maybe those should be new guys. I get that. But did it have to be? Did it have to be new guys when you could clean that up and have it be a lot better? And the answer is no. And it deserves to get its due. So, yeah. But, yeah. I have never... I've never had anybody react negatively to the restoration. Everybody's usually gets giddy about it. And that's just been, I just hold on to that, and I think just let it play out, because sooner or later, that's just my faith. It's all the faith I have left in the world. But yeah, I mean, I've never seen. I mean, every time a release of Star Wars comes out, I look at it, I know exactly what I'm going to see, and I can go to like 3 places in the film and just be like, yow, yikes, ooh, and they're still fucking with it. That's what's crazy about it. It's still just, it's like everybody gets to just like, what are you going to change? Oh, I'm gonna write Binksy, or Banksy, or whatever it was his name, Banksy. I'm gonna write that on the wall. It's like everybody just does something to it now. It's got all this stuff into it. It's the opposite of sacrosanct. It's really weird. Yeah, I mean, Lowry had done, stuff that at the time, was amazing. But there were early versions of it. Like if you go back, the Tanavi stuff had a lot of grain in it, especially C-3PO and R2-D2 in the White Corridor had a lot of grain. And if you go back and like you could do this right now with the DVDs or something, and you could isolate the blue channel, and you will literally see the temporal waves of smoothing that they're trying to use to get the grain out. It's like this weird blobby, it's like these little, these blob things follow all the characters as they move around. It's like, you can see, it's all in there. It's this kind of weird, soupy, as the vectors are trying to calculate each other's motion. They're just really primitive implementations of it. But and in many ways, all those algorithms have gotten better. You can still see them if you're trained, And that's part of why one of the core things behind the restoration was the idea of not using the tools, but in just literally restoring stuff that's in there. Because, yeah, you could do anything. Today, if you really wanted to, you could replace all of the model shots with new CG shots that were indistinguishable from the originals, virtually indistinguishable. You could. It would be ridiculous how much time you'd have to spend doing it, but you could. And then aesthetically, they would look just like the original shots, only be brand new. Yeah, you could. You could. The materials exist to do it, but what the fuck? Why? Mike, what was the first digital restoration? Me? Like just in general in the world? I don't know. Although I do remember at the time when all this started going down, I owned a post-production company. I was set up in the old Disney Animation building right off Cahuenga Boulevard, right next to Universal Studios. And up the street it was not far from Warner Brothers, but up the street was Pixel Magic. Is that Pixel Magic? I don't even know if they're still there. Pixel Magic, and at the time, Pixel Magic had a large restoration team, and they would do everything by hand. And I remember that there was a point where they were bidding with Disney against Lowry to do restorations for Disney for a bunch of Disney classics. And they had done they'd done like a showdown between them and Lowry. And I remember the guys telling me this, that they had done like the same, it was like a shootout. And at the time, they came back and they're like, we were going to get the contract because the Lowry algorithms ate all the glints out of everybody's eyes and took all the halos and stuff. Just like it was really, really destructive. And so they were like, our hand-done process is vastly superior. And Lowry got the contract because it was faster and cheaper, and probably also sexier because it was computers. But I just remember that little anecdote happening at the time because there was like this writing on the wall about hand-done artists as restoration artists it was all gonna go the way of the algorithm. Like everything else, like the digital versus analog audio argument, past the first wave of reactionary stuff and technical challenges, there comes some point at which there's a creative and clever and intelligent application of the technologies, and neither one is just a hands down clear winner. I mean, film is still superior to anything digitally in a lot of regard. There's a lot of ways in which film is better. There are ways in which it is not. You have to make these decisions, and it's better to have the choices than not. The film. There's not. Star Wars does not look like Star Wars anymore. It's not Star Wars anymore. It's not Star Wars anymore. It's literally not Star Wars anymore. It's another film. It's And it's like I said, it's always sort of relegated to, it's only a handful of nerds that care about that. Who gives a shit? And the only argument that's watertight against that is that it is important to a culture, any culture, and every culture, to have as accurate a historical record of its accomplishments as it can. Because we already know that since history is written by the winners, and because kings and pharaohs and conquerors would often deliberately destroy the records or amend the records of places they conquered, we know that that's a sort of thing that you have to fight to protect. There's some sort of entropy field against truth and history. And so having some sort of accurate record of how things were, how a people were, what they accomplished, what they did, is something that human beings value. And even though it seems sort of silly that you'd be talking about those sorts of things in the same breath as a little science fiction film, it wasn't a little science fiction film. It actually changed an awful lot that everybody is affected by, whether they know it or not. Like I said, everybody who's ever seen a film since Star Wars has seen and felt and lived the effects of that film. They just didn't realize it. To say nothing of the way it became part of our lexicon. And I have a 9-year-old boy who's a huge Star Wars fan. He's an OT Star Wars fan, but he's not blindly like if there's something that's cool in the prequels or something that's cool in one of the new films, he's like, that's cool. Like he's not like, fuck all those films. He's not like that. But the one that he sings in the house when he's just absent-mindedly singing, he's always singing the OT soundtracks. His favorite stuff is still the original stuff. But he also happens to think Darth Maul's double-bladed lightsaber is the bomb. That's his he was Darth Maul for Halloween one year. So he's like, that was cool. I liked that part of it. The rest of it he could take for granted. He can't remember any of the characters' names. But we went to the Star Wars Galaxy thing in Disneyland that doesn't really look like Star Wars in any way. And, you bet he took his Christmas money and got his little custom lightsaber that's not from any of the films, but he thinks it's really cool. But his actual Star Wars stuff, OT. And I didn't force that on him. I didn't even show it to him until he was 5. I didn't say anything. I just let it, he just liked it. So it's a film that is still relevant, still makes a difference, and just from a historical preservation stance, Yeah, it should exist anywhere. Just you don't have to release it in theaters. You don't have to supplant it on Netflix if you don't want to, I guess. But for it to literally not exist, for it to have been wiped from the face of the earth like it's some conqueror, I mean, it's a weird thing, and it's not good for society to have that as a thing. So. Terminator 2 is degrained, yeah. Bad degraining. Well, yeah, I mean, so is Predator. At least the last transfer that I saw of Predator was crazy. It was crazy. Everybody looked like dolls. I don't know if that ever got fixed, but I saw this transfer. It was like the new official transfer, and I'm like, ah! Oh, yeah, somebody just mentioned it. Yeah, Predator was like, I think Predator's fairly notorious. But again, it's a job, it's a gig, it's a thing. Put that stuff on there, and and if you're a younger artist and you've never worked with film, it's like the idea of grain is just like, oh, all grain is bad. Oh, it got fixed? Yeah. I'll tell you something interesting. I've never done a video about this, but I've thought about doing it. About one of the things that makes film to me always superior to digital is that in film, and I've done this to every digital thing I've ever created, titles, whatever. I used to do titles. This is how I started, was doing motion graphics titles. It was the first big film stuff I was doing. And so what would happen was I would create the titles digitally. They weren't optically, they were digitally created. Then they would eventually get passed up the chain and they would get filmed out. And then I was usually writing the music or doing sound design for film trailers and stuff. So I would go to the mix and I would watch the screening of the trailers. And my titles always looked way better on film than they did when I created them. I was like, holy shit, that looks way good. And, and I knew it wasn't just like some mystical thing about film. I mean, because I knew I created it. It's not, that's what it looks like, but why does it look better? It drove me crazy. And after about 6 films or so, I asked the guys who did the film out, I asked them if they would scan back in a film out and send me back my titles so I could see the difference between what I gave them and how it came out. And the very first thing I noticed was that in a film process, no matter how tight the gate was, this is true for any film, any camera, any optical printer, no matter how precise the registration and the mechanism was, every film had the tiniest little bit, the tiniest little, it went like this. Almost imperceptibly in some cases. You see old films that go like this, but even the most precise. And so what would happen is I would put up a graphic and it would be one frame. It just fades on and then it's a frame. But in the theater, inside of the human ability to perceive, it wasn't a still frame. It was dancing with electricity. It just would dance. And you almost don't notice it, except it was fast enough, it was enough motion that your brain would keep rescanning it, and it was alive. And I was like, could it be that simple? And so I started doing very deliberately tests on that. And I was like, why do those Scorsese and all those Scorsese films, it's a still image. But if you actually just put up a still image, it feels like something stopped. It feels like and I used to think it was just because the grain wasn't moving. But when I would take an image and I would bring it up and I would put film grain on it, it still wasn't right. And then you go back and you look at that, and even in the most precise stuff, the gate shift, the gate weave, everything was alive. There were no static frames in any film that has ever been filmed in the history of time, and all digital stuff is dead. It's just locked. If you put up a title, it's like it is a still image. And even if you put grain on it to try to, it's not moving. And that turned out to be a huge X factor in all of my digital work. To this day, anything I've ever shot digitally, I have put that I have all my little formulas for various types of gates. and you can see it. There's just something about it. It's just more interesting and it's more alive. If it's a camera and it pans and it stops, it's never robotic stop. It's always got this little thing in it, and your brain re-engages it in the image. It's like such an X factor little thing. I mean, it's night and day. It's not like a little thing. It's such that then you can't not see it. But yeah, man. It's like a little thing, but it's not. Oh, somebody was talking about the idea that if that's what George wants, then that's what we should have. Like it's somehow better that no one can see well, again, there's the argument part about that is watertight that you cannot argue with, is that, at least I guess I don't know if it's true anymore, but that it's George Lucas's film and he can do anything he wants with it. That's true. Of course it's true. That doesn't mean it's a good idea. That doesn't mean it's a good idea. And even if some people like it, it still doesn't mean it's a good idea. There's always going to be, I mean, that's the fact that you can find somebody who thinks it's great to put chocolate on your hamburger doesn't mean it's a great idea from a hamburger standpoint. It's my restaurant. I can do anything I want. Also true. Hey, I put chocolate on my hamburgers. Yeah, it's got ketchup and mustard, but also chocolate. It's my hamburger. It's my restaurant. I can do that. You're right. It's his hamburger. It's his restaurant. You're right. You're all right. And I like it like that. I think it's good. Okay. From a hamburger standpoint, probably not a great idea. At least not if you're trying to make a hamburger. It's a different thing. Call it something else. Let it be something else. Do a different film. So you can't argue with the fact that he has the right to do it. Doesn't mean it's a good idea. Scientists so preoccupied with whether they should, they never stop to think stop to think whether they should. Right? That's the one. What was it saying here? They fixed Predator, but only on the 4K UHD. There are only 2 Blu-ray versions, the first with MPEG-2 and the second with the Vaseline encoding. Okay, so it's on a 4K UHD is the one to see? Because I still love that film. Mike, what are your thoughts on the Godfather restoration? I don't know a lot about it. I know that I've seen it, and I liked the aesthetic of it. I don't actually know how true it was to the original. I never saw the original in a theater. I never was connected to that film in any way. By the time I saw it, it just was, it was like a choice between, wow, it's always looked shitty and now it looks great. I know a lot of love and care was done. I know that it was very conscientiously restored, but I'm not qualified to speak on where it fell in the range of potential or where it fell in terms of understanding the aesthetic. I can only tell you, in sort of the way I just got finished bashing things, I like the way it looks. So, my thoughts on the Project 4K77. I have not seen it. I have not seen any of the other restorations. I saw a little bit of one of Harmy's despecialized editions, and and I was like, like I said, I don't like to, it was a thing. Like, it was okay, yeah. I mean, it's not the same thing. It's not. It's fine. It's fine. It's not. It can't possibly compete. That's not fair. I don't want to do that. I don't want to shit on it. I don't want to do that. It is what it is. It is what it is. So I haven't seen the other ones, but I also know that I also know what really went in. I know what goes into. I know what you have to have in order to get these images to look their best. I know exactly how much it takes. I know how much money it takes. I know how many materials you have to have. I know how much time it takes. I would be very surprised if someone had gone through the same amount of effort and time. If they have, great. I don't care. It's not. Some people. I mean, there's this talk about tiny hills. Some people, like that's important to them, that they want to be the person who saved Star Wars. Or I couldn't give a shit. I don't care if anybody never knew it was me. I don't need it. And nothing. I don't care. Just want to do it right. Just want to make the film right. What's up, baby? How you doing? Hi. But whatever. So I can't speak intelligently. I haven't seen it. if it's fantastic and it's great, then great. Honestly, if somebody came out tomorrow with a restoration that looked better than Legacy, I would be like, I'm out, done, great, let's all have that. I would buy it immediately. I never wanted to do this in the first place. I just felt compelled to do it. But I would love it if somebody had just done it and I could look at it and go, well, that's better than I could do. That would be a fucking great. If I could watch Star Wars and see every shot and just be like, better than I could do, better than I could do, better than I could do, I'd buy that. I'd buy 10 copies of it. I've just never seen those images. I've never seen them. So I'm still like, well, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. That's definitely not it. Like, I've just seen it. And now you've seen some of it too. So it's just that. But it's really, I don't care where it comes from. I just want it to exist. People sometimes argue about things that can coexist side by side. It's funny. Blade Runner is one of those examples. Where we're doing the bathroom in our production and design facility in Florida. The bathroom is Deckard's bathroom. We're doing it right down to. There's a thread on it on the RPF if you ever want to see it. We got the Ennis tiles and we sculpted the thing. And it's going to look just like Deckard's bathroom, and only it's going to be real. So we, obviously watching a lot of stuff, and I went and saw one of the cuts, and it had all been completely regraded, and it was like all the great colors from the original were all blown out, all these subtle purples and blues. It was just teal and orange again. It was just teal and gold. I was like, no, So I don't watch that version. I go back to the one where the photography is way better, way subtler, way more stuff going in it. But I think it's the newer ones. It's just like, yeah, let's just make it look like everything else. It's really weird. As for the cuts of Blade Runner, it's like that thing, right? Where I guess my version of it would be, the original photography and no narration, just because the narration is so obviously, they were trying to make it so shitty that would never get approved, and it got approved. I mean, the narration's so bad. It's so bad. But it's bad in that way that it's like, it's like you can just tell they were trying to torpedo it, so they're, oh, that's terrible. Instead of, because of course, it's not like you don't know what's going on. But can they do anything? Can Ridley do anything he wants with it? Yep, he can. Yeah, man. I mean, like I said, all the restorations just the fact that there's even such a thing, any interest in it at all, sort of speaks to the point. Like, okay, there's a market out there, and then ideas of petitions and stuff was to try to convince corporate people that the need was so great that fiscally it would be worth it. Obviously, that hasn't worked. There have been petitions and demand, and I think Harmy's had like 1 million downloads or something, and it's never swayed anybody. So I've always sort of thought, well, there has to be a better argument to be made. I think the fiscal argument, the profit argument hasn't been made properly, because I think they could make a metric fuck ton on the film if it was properly restored. But I think also, I think it's an important, viable angle to know for somebody to be able to put on their resume, taking real custodian stewardship of preserving a classic piece of history. Who's the executive who wants to go down in history for preserving history? Has anybody considered that? I wonder. But yeah. It's a whole world, man. But and like anything else, there's going to be, like any other commercial enterprise, there's going to be great work and bad work and everything in between, and that comes with the territory. And people are sort of programmed, I think, at this point to assume they're going to buy and rebuy and rebuy and rebuy stuff, and further that they're not even going to have anything. They just click on a thing and then it gets turned on or turned off. But that becomes increasingly difficult to do when all you're doing is repackaging. So what I sort of, what sort of to me is encouraging about this restoration project of mine is that it's actually a new product. It's actually something we haven't seen before. I think everybody would really appreciate that. I think they've heard that a lot, but this would actually be true. And it wouldn't be because it was just more painted on or more changed, but because the last time you even saw this film was 1997, and by that point, nobody had ever really seen it anyway. So, it'd be fun. Is there a statute of limitations on Legacy's contributors? If someone finds your work lying around in 50 years or something, I don't know. I mean, like I said, it's, we got time yet. Like I said, I know it's annoying. Sometimes my patience on it is annoying, but it's philosophically driven, karmically driven, ethically driven, and for whatever reason, I seem to have boundless patience for it because it's worth it. And plus, Star Wars lives on. Film is forever. The secret history of Star Wars. Yeah, there's articles on it that talk about things, and I've heard various theories over the years about it. And George Lucas certainly has changed his mind and his stance on no shortage of things over the course of his life. He's a human being, But kind of all that is sort of like, well, those are all interesting stories, and maybe they explain why. But what about what is? What is Star Wars is gone. And except it's not. It's still so present. We're making Star Wars films and buying and making Star Wars lands, and yet the film that started it all, the original film, is completely gone, and it's nowhere. Any way you cut it, that is a borderline conspiratorial, incongruity. That doesn't make any sense. That's something so still viable and important. It's not all nostalgia. They're making literal films now. But the film that literally started it all is completely gone. You cannot find it. It's gone. That's weird. It's really weird. Oh, why is the Legacy Restoration website down? Because I haven't forwarded I changed hosts and I haven't forwarded the subdomain links. That's it. You just have to go into the control panel and forward the subdomain links. I didn't really know if anybody looks at it anymore because there hasn't been any news on it in many, many years. But I probably turn that back on. Can I ask Laura Beth Love if she has any opinion on Breaking Bad's cinematography? I don't know if she's even seen that. There seems to be a movement in film for TV to have a great aesthetic that makes a statement. Wait, but I have Legacy? Yeah, I have it, yeah. I think I do. I should. I still have it. I have the domain name and all that. Oh, yeah, I still have it. She says she'd have to get this up to speed on Breaking Bad because she hasn't seen it or doesn't remember it. You don't remember it that well? She doesn't remember it standing out as being exceptional. Okay. Just checking to see, but Star Wars Legacy stuff is still on the server. See. Checking, but yeah. I'm just checking. You got me paranoid. But I'm pretty sure we're good here. Yeah, we're good. Okay. But yeah, so she has no meaningful comment on Breaking Bad. And honestly, your opinion about people have different opinions about the look of stuff in television in general. in general, my personal take is that everything I see is crushed out and homogenized. But
Was the point that, or was the was the point that television is looking a lot better these days?
I think
was that the kind of the direction?
I think that was the question was, yeah.
Because it mostly is. Both, the stories are more interesting, the drama is more interesting, the productions are larger, like they're seem to be better funded. All the love is in television.
You mean like better than All in the Family or something?
Right, better
Right.
than All in the Family. Or really anything before the past 10 years. And when you've got a bigger market, right? You've got more competition because now we have more channels. Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime got into the market, and I don't know if it was before that or if it was just competing with HBO, or if it was competing
I don't know.
between those. But yes, it's gone way up.
If I could clone myself, what other films would I like to give the legacy treatment? You want to know one film that I would love to restore? Is My Left Foot. Just because it looks like nobody's ever given it any love, and I thought it was a great film. It's like amazing film. It's the one that introduced the world to Daniel Day-Lewis, so much so that people thought he was really that guy, and it looks terrible. I've often thought about just finding the filmmaker and being like, I'll do your film just to do it. Other films that are like really like that never got the really good treatment. I'm trying to think. Most of them are.
Arthur 2 on the Rocks.
Condor Man.
The Trouble with Angels. That one has never been given all the love it deserves.
Why are there so many movies and TV shows that look gray and dull? Well, there's a lot of things, there's a general, things are awfully, like I said, to my eye, it's a lot of stuff being really homogenized. But also, one way, there's a thing that's changed in filmmaking, not for the better, which is that there's a general propensity toward just shooting it neutral and then creating all of the colors in post, in grading. Because you can.
Shooting it neutral because,
Or,
that's
yeah.
natural, man.
Yeah, or just shooting it. Laura Beth is one of her pet peeves is just just shoot it with available lighting. Don't paint.
Oh my God.
I know, yes. But there's a thing that happens when we grade films, and almost all things are graded and now just power windowed, and they're almost all graded alike. One of the biggest things is that the human brain, you learn this when you work in compositing or visual effects especially, is that we have an experiential database in our lives, a great bullshit detector for how the world really is, how light behaves, how shadow behaves, how colors affect and blend with one another. Every time you've ever opened your eyes and looked at it, you were informing that database. And we have an inherent sense of when we are or are not following those rules. So what happens a lot of times is, just as an example, if you shoot a thing one way, you capture it one way, and then you change the color of this, in the real world, if that was a different color, that color would affect the things around it differently. The reflectance of objects and the inherent smoothness or diffuse nature of the material affects things around it, such that if this was gold, it would transport the light differently if it was made of a different material than if it was red. So a lot of times what we do is we start grading things, we choose an aesthetic, target for them, but we immediately pull the real interactions, the real interrelational dynamics of color and light. We pull them apart and now create a thing that our brain knows isn't real. It just knows it isn't real. It might be cool, but that's not real. If that object was that bright or that dark, it would be different. If it was that color next to this object, it would be different. It's our experiential database is amazing. And so you can make it that way and it can be cool, but it's not real. And somewhere it creates a disconnect between us and the images. I don't think by extension that it's a coincidence that we are not as connected to films that they're all forgettable, when certainly that's one of the things that we're doing is it's no longer real photography. It's just like, just start here and then now grade and color something into something else. But in the real world, if those things were that color, the photography would have a million other things going on that would be more subtle and beautiful. It's the same thing with available light. If you just shoot what the light is and then try to change all the values later, then you haven't spent any time in the art of lighting to think about your values and what matters and what doesn't, and letting those same things in the real world, the light propagation and the transport of light, be the real things. Of course, that forces you to have an idea. That forces you to commit to something. That forces you to have experience and something really, something to say that you can commit to so that you can capture what is. But if you don't really know and you don't have the expectation of needing to know, you can always Control Z it. Well, then, yeah, just shoot it and we'll just make it all happen later. And then now you've never really committed to anything. You've never really, you miss all the subtle interactivity in light and shadow and in image composition. It's not really filmmaking.
It's kind of half the job is gone,
Yeah, at least half, yeah.
at least half. In which case, you don't need me. Just point the camera at it and press the go button.
Here's Dave. Dave's got a question. Here's a fun question for you. So while working, what did you feel like you would love to change or do in your version, but you know you shouldn't? There has to be something. Well, like I said, for me, the composite stuff, the matte lines. The matte lines to me, like every matte line that ever showed up drives everyone involved crazy. Not one person who ever put a model over a star field and ended up with a line around it was like, I'm okay with that. They're all embarrassed by it. They hate them. And so it's the matte lines more than anything to me. Compositing, that would be the thing that I would be most tempted to do something about. Just because it's like, you would not notice it. In fact, you wouldn't even notice that you didn't notice it. You just... These garbage artifacts around the images wouldn't be there. I just understand the argument both ways. Like, well, that's what it was in 1977. That's true. That's true. Got me there. But if I was tempted, that would be my thing, is to get rid of the matte lines. Other than that, there's like things that happen sometimes where a photographic plate in through the optical printer, you see this like in the sandcrawler shot, where the sandcrawler's got one set of gate motion and the background's got its own. So they actually go like this. And you can see it. It completely destroys the composite. If those things that were otherwise not really visible for all sorts of reasons in the analog domain in the 70s, if they're now completely in your face and you're like, why is that happening? Well, that's something they couldn't see back then. Now you can't miss it, and now all you're thinking about, instead of looking at the sandcrawler, is you're like, what the fuck is going on? Then that would tempt me to go, let's just not do it. We just don't want to take people out of it because it's so in your face now. It wasn't in your face then. That's, again, that slippery slope, maybe. Did I go about removing baked-in negative dirt and damage, or was that stuff considered something to be saved? So I have in my process is non-destructive, which means that any stage of it you can dial it back to any stage of it. It's also part of what makes it so slow, because it's harder when you want to keep everything live. As a result, there's actually a tier for that in my restoration where it's like all the stuff and then those little things. So there are a number of things that are all the way back on the negative. They're in every version of every print everywhere, no matter which one you see them. There's a few things that were on the lens, and I have a tier with them and without them. When it's like just something, I'm always asking myself, is this part of the dramatic aesthetic? Is this necessary to keep, or is it just like, and again, those are aesthetic choices. So, I have both. So yeah, those would constitute changes. But again, there's just that thing where there's things which were intended, and things which are, like the axes of motion for the models were limited, and yet the shots and the the speed through the frame and the position, the edits were served by them, and everything worked around them, and such that things like how the X-Wings roll or don't roll are dramatically effective and don't need to be re-engineered. That exact shot minus the matte lines, I think, would only be better. But you'd have to just step up and go, yeah, I took those out because those aren't part of the drama. The ship itself, the model work. Yes, in 1977s they used models. Yes, we kept the ship. Yes, the ship could only do this because they couldn't figure out how to do it. And yes, but that everything else worked around that. Leave that. You know, the fucking coffee stain. Nobody. That was not. That's get out with the coffee stain. That's whatever that balance is. I would probably be okay with. But you know. If somebody said, so if I was doing a restoration and officially, and somebody said, all right, you can do it, but you got to take all the matte lines out, I wouldn't be like, no. I'd be like, okay, it's still going to be Star Wars. And some people would go, no, it isn't. You took the matte lines out. I'd be like, you're right. So in terms of fixing color timing, no. But, you know, the color timing is real broad strokes in Star Wars. Because they don't have the anticipation of doing what we can do in Resolve with power windows. So it's really not that complicated a film to grade. And I would not regrade it. I would, I would follow what clearly it was originally going for. And the degree to which you might change it, maybe you unify it so that if photochemically it was like a little orange, a little pink, a little orange, pink, but you can clearly we're going for this one hue, maybe you stabilize that, maybe. Again, it would be a question of, does it cross into the perception threshold for a modern audience? Hard choices to make, but would love to be up all night struggling with those choices. Can I explain what ray tracing is and whether it's a big deal for film? Is that a joke? Are you just trying to set me up? I'm going to ask you that question. Do you really want to talk about not just ray tracing, but path tracing? Is that a real question? Words on a page versus images on a screen. Grapes of Wrath book versus the Ten Commandments. Which should be improved? Have you heard of people fan editing the prequels and combine them all into one film? I haven't, but I wouldn't be surprised. They're not great films. That they suffer from a lot of very basic film, just basic stuff, just basic films. They're not well-made films. They're just not. Forget what they are. I mean, no matter what, if you just pulled them out and made the characters and looked at, they're not laid out well. So. Aesthetically, you know, they all look like they stopped. I remember in the advertising, they stopped cutting footage of the original trilogy side by side with the prequel trilogy. They stopped that very early because it's not good when you put them side to side. You know, we sort of relatively, this is a thing that happens. It's why you go to a Pixar movie and you just sort of get in the vibe of it. You just get in because the rules are consistent internally, relatively, inside the Pixar film. It doesn't look like real, but the light propagates very much like the real world does. And so you sort of inside of it, you just buy into the world of the shading, which are all kinds of approximations and whatnot. So you can get, so if you watch the prequels, you know, 10, 20 minutes into the prequels, your brain sort of recalibrates for what the real world is in that world. And then you cut it with like real world and you're like, oh, geez, it all looks like a cartoon. It all looks like it's not good to see them back to back. But if you work in CG, you know that's not, what it really takes to make a single thing photoreal is almost not reasonable. And to make everything CG, I mean, they'd still be working on the first film. And then you could make it so that it all looked like completely real. But they're not still working on that first film. That's why limited shot counts. And, you know, as a director, I use CG kicking and screaming. Because as a guy who's done photoreal CG for half my career, anytime you can put something in front of a camera, you get a billion things for free. Because I know how much time we have to spend to make a CG object look real. And it's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. I know what I had to do to make R2 look real. It was not reasonable. It took years. You're a gamer. Okay, but that doesn't tell me if you really want to know, if you're just setting me up. George and company would never have had matte lines if they were able. This is true. No one makes a movie with planned matte lines. This is true. They distracted could go. I think they're probably one of the places that the only people that would have a problem with them are the ones where there is no argument other than the one where it's exactly how it was. Except even that one, nobody's sure exactly how it was, and then now the negative's gone, so you can't find out. That's why I said sooner or later, I think there has to be an aesthetic. There's got to be an aesthetic understanding to make these choices. So when colored timing, do you go for more realistic or more original? You mean in the case of Star Wars? I would go for the language of colored timing at the time Star Wars was made, and in George Lucas's time was very unlike today, was not naturalistic. I mean, he wasn't putting pantyhose over the lenses for diffusion because of how naturalistic it is. That's a very stylized choice. And I think there are very few words more appropriate to describe George Lucas's vision than stylized. So as such, we are in this section of the drama, we're in this act, we're at this turning point in the plot, thinking about looking at the original grading from that point, that the use of color is a dramatic element, and it's not like a documentary, or it's not trying to be as naturalistic as possible. If you're making a film and you got a bad guy going, "You shall die," okay, we're already not immediately like it's naturalistic. So I think I would approach the grading as it was originally intended, with the idea of grading as a dramatic tool, and not simply, make everything look exactly like it looked when they shot it. That was never the intent. That's never how it was graded. It was never graded to look neutral. It was graded the way a film by George Lucas would be made in 1977, using color stylistically to further the drama. Yeah, Dave says a distraction-free experience is my target. I would agree with that. But again, even that, you got to know what makes it distracting. If you have somebody who knows every frame like I do, and we know where all the scratches are, and we're just like there with a clip book, just a clipboard trying to just go, well, that's missing. It's like people who would go to a Harry Potter movie just with a little checklist to make sure everything that was in the book was, okay, that scene's in the book, it's not in the movie, that's a bad movie. Like, that's not how you make a movie. Books don't make good movies. Good screenplays make good movies. You have to condense and change. You're reading a book takes longer. It's a different medium. You can't just take the book and put it on the screen. But if people are going, well, that scene wasn't in it, and he said something different, okay, so you're not really watching the movie. You're just come here making you have a clipboard and a comparative analysis. You're right, that's different. You win 3 points, now shut up. Whatever. How is the Fox acquisition affecting the possibility of a proper restoration? If Fox ever held onto the distribution rights, would they have any word? So, yeah, the Fox acquisition, I've heard many conflicting things about this. There's very much the idea that Disney's acquisition of Fox was almost entirely just to get the last film, which was Star Wars. It's, again, I've heard so many conflicting stories from people inside the walls. I don't know what the current legal state of the whole thing is. But certainly, certainly, even if there's, no matter what state the property sharing is in, everybody stands to benefit from a Star Wars restoration, a proper one. They work out who gets all the money, divvy it up amongst themselves. There's a way to work that out. But, money in, money out. The Shining. Shining's a great movie. The book is different. It's great. It's from the film. If you don't know anything about the book, but when people are like, the book's better. The book's different. The book's a book. It's not. This isn't a book. You don't put a book on the movie. That's just not. It doesn't work. I don't know why people ever do that. It's like, yeah, how long does it take you to read that chapter in a book? Oh, it took me 30 minutes. Okay, so now you're already through Act 1.5 in the first movie. So you see, it's a different pace that we're sending out the story here. You can't do it like whatever. Did I like the Mad Max Fury Road grading? Funny, we just watched that last night. Just watched it. Just happened to watch it. My son had never seen it. I don't like the grading. I see it, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that. Right. That's cool.
It's so committed.
It's committed.
I love the day for night sequence.
The day for night, everybody talks about that one, yeah. I don't like it's cool, like it looks cool, but I can't not see all of the work in it and how unnatural it is.
It's also kind of a comic book.
It's a comic booky thing. No, it makes sense why he did it. It makes sense. It looks good. It looks, because it's designed to. In fact, it's done. You do whatever you have to make it look good. This part is still gold. This is blue. This highlight on their eyes is now 1,000,000 times stronger than it would be. It's not. It's completely stylized, and it's very, very well done. I just don't like that. I just don't like. I don't like seeing the artificiality that clear. That's all. That's just me. But it was, like if it was me, I'd be like, how could you have lit it so that it did that for real and get all the other stuff that you would have gotten instead of where I can like almost literally see I can almost literally see the power window lines and the feathering. I don't like that. I don't like seeing the Resolve artist in his bay. I like seeing the film, but that's purely very, very well executed. I'm not a big fan of the thing. But that film is its thing. That film is committed. There's no other way to say that film. That film is committed. It's committed. It's a very distinctive film. My little boy, like, he didn't know what to do. He was just, it's like, yeah, that's kind of part of it. You're just supposed to be like, what the hell? It just sort of beats you up. Did I like The Shining 4K remaster? I don't know that I've seen it. I don't know that do we have a 4K remaster? I haven't seen it. No, I don't think I've seen it. 4K remaster? Or maybe I have, I don't know. I have to look. I don't remember. Yeah, that film is so 70s. We're talking about The Shining. That's the game. Why did they replace the Warner's logo? Did they? I don't know. Did they? But yeah. What's my take on filming in digital in general? Basically, somebody wrote an article chalking bad digital photography to default camera coding. Garbage in, garbage out. I lived through the transition from analog to digital audio, and there was like people who were insisting on using the digital suite the way that the analog stuff could never make it sound right because they were fighting it, and then they could point to ways in which it was inferior. And then there's people who figured out how to use the technology to develop a different aesthetic and a great one. And there's obviously advantages in the signal to noise ratio and all those sorts of things. And also the sound of analog is gone forever. It does not sound like it. And if you go back and you listen to a good old, on a Studer tape deck with some 996 Ampex and you hear a fat, warm mid-range that you just have not heard since, and it's gone. And that's just the fact of it. And I don't care what equipment you have, because I've been all that stuff. I have all the analog gear, all the outboard stuff, I have vintage stuff, tube stuff. I have all my original recordings are all on reel to reel. And if you play them back in a vintage thing, it's like, okay, I forgot that sound. I have even my fucking record player upstairs, you put on vinyl and it's like, Jesus Christ, there's something in that mid-range we just don't have anymore. That said, we also have a way better to signal to noise ratio and greater dynamic range, and so it's a different beast. Similarly, shooting analog, shooting on film, shooting on digital, first you got to approach them differently and work to the strengths of the thing. But the biggest issue with shooting digital is not shooting digital. It's that what came with shooting digital seemed to be also generally letting go of great lighting and composition and committing to colors and edit stuff because there's no consequence for changing edits. I mean, just generally speaking, the disciplines have gone down because they can. So I'd say that's just about the skill set and having things to say and not so much the tools. When you have, Roger Deakins shoots digitally, and those are still amazing images. I mean, some of his most amazing stuff is shot digitally because he's great. So he just figures out, okay, this is the aesthetic tool. How do you capture that with this thing? So, Don't I like the images that come out of the Alexa 65? What I've seen of them, I have never actually shot myself with a 65, but there's a lot of things in it that seem like, well, I got a good sensor and you've got a good dynamic range, and yeah, but you can listen to recordings of an orchestra from the 1920s where it's all mono and the whole thing's got this quality to it because it's a limit, and the recordings are fantastic. The drama and the emotion in the recordings is amazing. The sound is always secondary to the emotion, to what's been captured, the musicality and the performance. And it's very much, I think, the same with visually. If what's going on is truly, if the drama of what's going on in front of you has really got you on the edge of your seat, it's remarkable how forgiving we are about what's going on in the visuals. When the visuals aren't super, you know, when the drama, when there's really nothing to say, then I think that you're just like, that's all you're looking at is everything else because you're not sucked in. So all those sorts of things, I just feel like, yeah, don't worry so much about the camera. Cameras are good. Cameras are fine. Cameras aren't going to be your problem. Your film wasn't going to be brilliant except that you didn't have 2 more K in resolution. That's not going to be the problem. Learn maybe instead to combine the world's best, the best of both worlds, and learn what if you didn't have 6,000 shots to get the guy between here and getting him out of the house? What if you had to do that in one continuous shot? What if you had to have 2 cuts in this dialogue scene and not 200? How would you move the camera? How would you move people around? How would you keep the action interesting? How would you reinforce dramatically and plot-wise what's going on rather than just cut? What if you had to do that? What if you couldn't color grade it to everything? How would you actually light it? I think those skills would serve people a lot better than just worrying about the technology. Does anyone actually like THX 1138? I mean, I like listening to what? You like it? She says it's fun. I like hearing some of the early processing in the sound design because I'm like, it's in Star Wars. But this is as much as I have to say about that. I care more about the bastardized edits for the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. I never saw those, but I do remember. I remember that there were some changes in Raiders, which I think got undone. And I think Spielberg came back eventually. I might remember this wrong, but then I think Spielberg came back and he was like, you know what? I'm not doing that ever again, and I regret ever changing my films. I think he said that. Did he do stuff in E.T.? Yeah, he did shit in E.T. He like took out guns and made them walkie-talkies or something. Which I don't remember ever seeing that, but I remember he had changed some shots in Raiders. In fact, boy, this is dug in my brain somewhere, but I think he changed a shot where a car goes over a cliff, and it got changed so that the camera, instead of panning down with it like a camera would, a camera fell with it, which a camera couldn't do then, and they weren't doing. And so there's something like, it was like a thing where you'd think, oh, that's cooler, but then you've ruined the aesthetic of the camera language in that film. Anyway, I don't remember. That might be something. Dave says E.T., yeah. Don't I think Roger Deakins' photography work is a little dull, softly lit lately? You know what? I haven't seen his most recent work. When I think of Roger Deakins, I keep thinking about all these Coen brothers shots that I'm just like, God, Jesus, that's great. I remember the sound design too in those films so great. I remember in Fargo, in the first scene, William Macy walks into this bar, and I just know from a sound design standpoint, you know, when you're creating an ambience, when you're really trying to put people in a place. I remember they came in and I was like, that is an absolutely perfect holosonic ambience in a way that's so difficult to create. And the technical mastery on those films, so great. Oh yeah, Dave, you showed me this shot? Is that where it was from? Wouldn't be surprised it was you who showed me the Raiders shot. Yeah, you know, but again, it's that saying, well, we can, but it doesn't mean we should. Is it possible to stereo-nize a mono recording? I mean, there's tricks in which you can make it come out of both speakers, but you can't make a mono recording stereo. You know, where there's actual alignment differences between multiple microphones. You can do things. You can spread out a stereo field. You can delay one. There's lots of things you can do to make it come out of 2 speakers and even create some sort of quasi-localized stuff. But if it ain't in there, it ain't in there. Oh, the E.T. special edition is gone forever? Yeah. I mean, like I said, you know, I understand it's a new toy and you're not connected to your work anymore. And I mean, I did this actually, for one of my composition master classes, I took a theme that I'd written for this film in like 2004 or something, or 14 maybe it was. I don't remember what it was now. 7? I don't know. And I redid it just to illustrate the point that, like, it's fine the way it was. I was proud of it at the time that I did it. It represented the very best I could do at the time, and it does not need any fixing. But now, years later, it was like, well, now if I was doing it, it could be way better. And we actually did that in this master class and just redid this main title. It's the same main title, only it's way orchestrated better, and it's done. And it's like, yeah, you could do that forever. You could always go back and, but you don't. It's just, you just move on. But yeah, I mean, some people that I know in image processing have said things as profound and unbelievable, but because of who it's coming from, I believe them. That there will come a point at which, a computer will be able to reconstruct an image, a brand new image, from whatever input that you give it. So, it's not just like cleaning up the pixels. It's like, oh no, that's a checkered tie, and a checkered tie would have actually done this, and it's recreating the image, only it'll be exact. Like, maybe we'll see if that comes. A user on YouTube has done great videos of recordings from the 30s and 50s that sound amazing. Yeah, I mean, there are tons of. There's tons of research, both in sound and in visuals. Especially I can certainly say, especially in image stuff, that is just absolutely amazing, and great. And like, these are never things that we have to, like, you don't have to demonize them, and you also don't have to embrace them like, well, that's the new way. There's room for, town's big enough for all of us. But no matter what, when you're talking about something, I saw it was a couple years ago. It was the first time that I saw the Sistine Chapel, right? Yeah. And, and I had read a lot about the restorations of that, and I just remember actually looking at it and just having this weird sense, like, man, if it's really true that, that these things, that there's some people feel very passionately about that, and they've just got images of stuff that's gone, just wiped out, details, full things just missing. And I just remember at the time thinking about, like, wow, it's one thing to be thinking about Star Wars, but what if that really happened? What if those things are all right and all those images are true, and it's now gone forever, and this is what's gone forever? Like, I just remember thinking, yikes, careful. It was a really weird experience being in there, just because I was just like, what if somebody ruined it? What if that's true? What if the people who are the biggest critics, and there are some very vocal critics, and their websites are plastered with before and after images that undeniably got rid of stuff. It's like, what if they're right, and it's now all gone forever? It was just a really weird experience. Anyway. No wonder. I'm like, I haven't eaten today. What time is it? Oh, it's 7:30. Yeah, it's maybe time to get something to eat. Thanks for joining our after talk. Like I said, if you missed it, and there's an earlier video we talked about the restoration, you can always go to the Vimeo channel, and you can always hit me up if there's particular stuff like this that you'd like me to talk more about. I don't generally do that. Our master classes are always about composing and stuff. Some people have asked for visual effects stuff. Some people have asked for filmmaking stuff. Especially have asked for Ms. Love to come and talk about shooting and lighting and directing and all that stuff. So, if there's really a demand for that, we will do that. And further, we'll never monetize it, so you never have to sit through ads. Just the type of guy I am. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day, night. For those you here in the United States, enjoy that freedom people died for. And we'll see you on the next one. Okay. Bye-bye.